Chapter 23-28 Huai Jian. Chapter 23-28 Huai Jian. Ling Han fled, and the 5 elites resolutely abandoned their pursuit. After all, it would be impossible to catch him. What did it matter that they didn't want to give up? They couldn't catch up to Ling Han at all, so attempting to pursue him would simply be a waste of energy. Ling Han roared, and his voice rumbled across the sky like thunder. This time he had not only recovered his cultivation, but he had even advanced to the 11th secret. He could almost advance to the ascending origin tier. This was naturally delightful news. Several days later, he arrived at the nearest city. Sure enough, he was able to make contact with Qi Shuang, Yuan, and the others. They had been waiting in this city since long ago, and they would venture out to search for the others every once in a while. Up until now, Ling Han, Yu Yuan, and 3 other people still hadn't returned yet. This was half of their group, so they naturally couldn't leave. They grew increasingly anxious as the days passed by. Upon seeing Ling Han and the 3 other people return, they were naturally beside themselves with delight. Because Ling Han and the others all practiced the heaven-deceiving technique, and because none of them actively revealed their cultivation level, no one discovered their explosive rise in cultivation. If they knew about this, they would most likely be reminded of the ancestral king's blood. Otherwise, how could their cultivation levels have risen by so much in a mere 5 years? In any case, could a vial of ancestral king blood help so many people achieve such a huge rise in cultivation level? They naturally wouldn't consider this. Yuan won't be returning, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. I personally witnessed him being killed by 5 elites at the 3rd leaf of the 9th lotus. If I hadn't been quick enough, and if I hadn't fled in time, perhaps I would have been killed too. What? Qi Shuang and the others exclaimed in shock. Just who was Yu Yuan? Even though he didn't have an ancestral king or heavenly venerate as his master or father, his incredible talent as a monarch star had already attracted the attention of an 18th Lotus ancestral king. This ancestral king would take him as a disciple after Yuan advanced to the 9th Lotus. Now, however, the latter had suddenly been killed. How were they going to report this? Who was so audacious? They actually dared to kill a monarch star. Qi Shuang roared in fury. His wings shook violently, triggering devastating gusts of wind. Monarch stars were the future of a realm. At the very least, they could become 18th Lotus elites. Thus, the death of such a prodigy was a huge blow. Those 5 people are very likely the same people who triggered the collapse of the spatial passageway, Ling Han said. Tapping the air, he summoned his memory of these 5 people's appearance, including the scene of them pursuing him. He had already prepared this well beforehand. As expected, it's them. Yuan spat as he snapped his pincers. He had returned to investigate the situation once, and even though the small town with the transfer formation had indeed been destroyed, those powerful enough had still managed to survive. However, recalling the events of that day, it was indeed the 5 people shown in Ling Han's memories who had caused that disaster. As it turned out, they were even crazy enough to target a monarch star, someone who represented the future of the realm. Even though Ling Han was using these 5 people to cover up his crime, he didn't feel like he was wronging them at all. After all, they had indeed wanted to kill Yu Yuan. It was just that they had failed to succeed. When we arrive at the 4 Splendor Academy, we have to report this to the ancestral kings. We have to hunt these 5 people no matter where they flee. Qi Shuang said with killing intent. They actually dared to kill a monarch star. They've trampled the bottom line of the ancestral kings. How vile and detestable. Yuan spat. He was also brimming with killing intent. Even Wu Ye and the others were enraged. This wasn't because they had a good relationship with Yu Yuan, but rather because Yu Yuan was still in possession of some ancestral king blood. Since he had died at the hands of other people, this ancestral king blood had been naturally lost as well. This was the cause of their anger. They had also sacrificed everything for this ancestral king blood. Okay. After composing himself, Yuan said in a solemn voice, "Let's continue." Yu Yuan was already dead. This fact couldn't be changed no matter what they did. If anything was to blame, they could only blame him for being in possession of something valuable after having obtained some ancestral king blood. Moreover, those 5 people were also audacious to the extreme, actually daring to hunt and even kill a disciple of the 100 Battles Academy. Moreover, the latter was a monarch star. Their actions would greatly affect the overall strength of the realm. One had to realize that each monarch star had the potential to become a heavenly venerate, although the chances of this happening were pitifully slim. They continued their journey, using transfer formations to traverse the mountains and waters. After 15 years of travel, they finally arrived at the 4 Splendor Academy. There were still 20 years until the 1000 Academy tournament began. However, over 700 academies had already arrived, with many more arriving every few days. By the looks of it, everyone would arrive 10 years before the tournament began. This was indeed a grand event. Brilliant monarch tears could be seen everywhere in the 4 Splendor Academy, and it was as if they were as abundant as cabbage. One could see dozens of them with a single glance. Ling Han kept an especially low profile, and he dutifully cultivated with Hunyo and the others. However, even though the Empress and Hunyo had already reached the peak stage of the 10th secret, they still didn't dare to use the ancestral king blood. This was because their respective physique wasn't as powerful as Ling Han's. As such, they needed to be extremely careful and conservative. In reality, Ling Han's rocket-like speed of cultivation also came with significant side effects. Right now, he needed to continuously strengthen his foundation. Otherwise, once he advanced to the ascending origin tier, not being able to progress any further would be the least of his worries. At that time, he might even lose his life. Thus, Ling Han definitely wouldn't advance to the ascending origin tier before resolving the side effects of advancing too fast. Anyhow, the 4 Splendor Academy had naturally prepared accommodations for everyone who arrived. Generally speaking, there was little interaction between people as they were all preparing to show their wares during the tournament. Moreover, such large tournaments would naturally lead to all kinds of gambles. Sure enough, several gambling houses started to publish odds for the tournament, with some allowing bets for which Academy placed first, and others accepting bets for which Prodigy would reign supreme. They also accepted bets for the top 10 academies, the top 10 cultivators, and so on. Simply put, they accepted bets for all kinds of things. It was quite an astonishing sight. Qi Shuang went over to have a look, and he returned with the newest lists of odds. There were 5 lists in total, and they naturally came from 5 different gambling houses. The odds for the 100 Battles Academy were 1 to 5, and this was for being ranked around 70th among all of the academies. This was roughly equivalent to where they had placed last time. After all, the gambling houses wouldn't publish random odds without doing any research. They had naturally investigated and analyzed each academy and their representatives before publishing these odds. As for the cultivator rankings, only Yu Yuan had managed to make it into consideration. His odds for coming first were 1 to 11, a clear sign that the gambling houses didn't fancy him at all. The Eternal Dragon Academy still has the lowest odds. Qi Shuang remarked. They all looked at the first line of the lists. Indeed, it was identical across all 5 lists. The odds for the Eternal Dragon Academy achieving victory was 10 to 11, a remarkable number given that there were 1,000 academies participating in this tournament. However, no one found this strange. After all, the Eternal Dragon Academy had a mighty disciple who was destined to create history. His odds in the cultivator rankings were also the lowest. He was called Huai Jian, and it was rumored that he had been born with a sword in his embrace. Oh, as he grew older, this sword also grew with him. His skill with the sword was peerless, and even the ancestral kings praised his brilliance. They said that if they were at the same cultivation level, they would find it difficult to block 10 of his attacks. If only a single ancestral king had said this, everyone could perhaps treat it as a light-hearted joke. However, several ancestral kings had said this, so this was definitely a serious endorsement of Huai Jian's freakish strength. Chapter 23-29 Sun Ping. Chapter 23-29 Sun Ping. This was indeed the truth. In the previous tournament, Huai Jian had astonished everyone with his sword, carving through his opponents in an unstoppable surge to triumph. Not only had he achieved an easy victory for the Eternal Dragon Academy, but he had even suppressed 9 powerful opponents without any trouble, winning the esteemed first place of the cultivators' ranking. No one could shake his firm standing as the most powerful competitor. This time, it was rumored that Huai Jian had already reached the peak stage of the 11th leaf of the 8th lotus. It was said that he would immediately advance to the 9th lotus and become the disciple of a heavenly venerate after battling for the Eternal Dragon Academy. Wu Ye and the others shook their heads in disappointment. Without Yu Yuan, where would they place this time? Ling Han was very powerful, but he was only at the 3rd leaf of the 8th lotus, after all. Moreover, he could only rely on his precious sword. However, the 1000 Academy tournament prohibited the use of any external powers. Otherwise, if someone used an ancestral king decree, and their opponent then did the same, what point would the tournament have? Not only were competitors prohibited from drawing on external power, but they were even prohibited from wearing treasured armor. This was a competition that showcased cultivators' raw strength. Can we maintain our top 100 placing? Qi Shuang asked in doubt. There were only 100 or so monarch stars at the 8th lotus in the entire foreign realm. During the previous tournament, many of them had been at the 5th leaf or 6th leaf. Now, it was very likely that they had all reached the 10th leaf or 11th leaf. Thus, Wu Ye and the others could only turn their attention to the academies without monarch stars. They could rely on their overall strength to defeat these academies. We'll try our best, Yuan said. Who told them to lose Yu Yuan? With the loss of this supreme prodigy, they had also lost the core member of their team. What's the prize for the academy that comes first? What's the prize for the person who comes first? Ling Han asked. If it weren't for the prizes, why would he have come here? Of course, eating chicken wings was also a part of his motivation. Qi Shuang looked at him in astonishment. Didn't this person have ears? Or perhaps he had left his brain at home. He was still in the mood to ask about the prizes for coming first. It seems to be a primordial battle beast, he replied. He still ended up answering Ling Han's question, since the latter was a monarch star who was even more impressive than Yu Yuan. There would definitely come a moment where Ling Han astonished everyone else. In fact, he might even reach the same height as Huai Jian. However, this thought vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and Qi Shuang immediately shook his head. No one could compare to Huai Jian. The latter was a monarch star who had the greatest chance of becoming a heavenly venerate in the foreign realm in the past epoch. As for the academy that comes first, their prize is more so that of pride and glory. They'll mainly receive points and starstones, and they'll also enjoy some celestial medicines. Only the person who comes first in the individual rankings can obtain a battle beast, Yuan added. According to rumors, that's indeed a primordial battle beast. It was discovered by an ancestral king in some mystery realm, and it still hasn't hatched yet. This was Qi Shuang's first time hearing this news as well, and he couldn't help but be astonished as he said, according to legends, primordial battle beasts are all capable of becoming ancestral kings. Moreover, after a blood recognition ceremony, they'll never betray their master. That's why it's so enticing. Yuan shook his head with emotion. In this lifetime, they would never come close to becoming ancestral kings. However, someone would obtain an ancestral king-level beast pet. Sure enough, this was a painful comparison. According to rumors, the ancestral king didn't hatch this battle beast by himself, because he received an order from some heavenly venerate. The heavenly venerate wants to seize this opportunity to give Huai Jian a huge fortune. Yuan continued. His expression of envy grew even greater. Huai Jian was someone who possessed the great fortune of heaven and earth. He was superior to all monarch stars, and to belong to the same generation as he was nothing but misfortune. Ling Han smiled upon hearing this. He wouldn't mind accepting such a powerful battle beast. If nothing else, it would at least appear impressive. After all, had anyone ever witnessed a celestial king or ancestral king acting as a servant before? No. To reach this cultivation level meant that their grasp of regulations was already equal to heaven and earth. Which of them wasn't proud and ambitious? How could they accept the humiliation of becoming a servant? However, battle beasts were different. Before hatching them, one could use a drop of their blood to form a master-slave relationship. By doing so, the hatched battle beast would never betray their owner. Ling Han decided to take this battle beast. Huai Jian, huh? Ling Han brimmed with fighting spirit. This was a supreme prodigy who had trod all other monarch stars underfoot. His evolution index was probably approaching 11, right? Ling Han yearned for a battle. Pum! Right at this moment, a huge racket traveled over from the door. "Where's Yu Yuan? Come out and battle me," someone roared. Everyone walked out from the hall, only to see a young man standing in the courtyard. This was a demon whose skin was so red that it was almost black. He had a pair of horns on his head, and he was almost 3 meters tall. His arms were bare, and they were riddled with symbols. He didn't look like a person, and he instead looked like a war soldier. San Ping! Upon seeing this person, the pupils of the disciples from the 100 Battles Academy contracted. Apprehension spread across their faces. San Ping was a prodigy from the magnificent Equal Academy. He was also a monarch star, and in the previous 1000 Academy tournament, it was none other than him who had lost to Yu Yuan. It was due to that defeat that his academy had ranked beneath the 100 Battles Academy. He had been unreconciled to that loss, so he was now running over before the 1000 Academy tournament even began. He was itching to have a rematch with Yu Yuan. San Ping swept his gaze across everyone, and it was clear that he couldn't give a toss about them. Even the 2 elites at the 3rd leaf of the 9th lotus couldn't attract his attention. He humphed and said, "Since when did Yu Yuan become such a coward?" "Impudence!" Qi Shuang roared. Boom! His roar materialized, transforming into a wave that surged toward Sun Ping. Pum! Sun Ping threw a punch, instantly shattering the sound wave. He wore a haughty expression, saying, "Am I wrong?" 11th leaf! They all exclaimed in shock. Even though Qi Shuang hadn't unleashed his full power, how could an 8th lotus cultivator block the attack of a 9th lotus elite? Unless they were at the 11th leaf of the 8th lotus, shattering the barrier between the 2 tiers. They possessed the strength of 9th lotus elites, so they could naturally block the attacks of 9th lotus elites. Sure enough, the monarch stars from the previous tournament had all advanced in leaps and bounds, reaching the 11th leaf. How could the other monarch tiers rival such powerful prodigies? Even though Wu Ye, Sun Feng, and the others had reached the 7th leaf and 8th leaf, what did it matter? This was an insurmountable gulf. Qi Shuang suppressed the anger in his mind, and he said, "Yu Yuan has already died." "Impossible!" San Ping immediately roared, his expression also changing. He was hell-bent on avenging his defeat, and he was determined to surpass his rival. It was also because of this ambition and motivation that he had been able to soar from the 4th leaf to the 11th leaf in just 1,000,000 years. However, just as he was about to realize his dream, he was met with such shocking news. Yu Yuan had died. How was this possible? "Yes, he's died," Yuan said with a shake of his head. He recounted how the 5 audacious 9th Lotus elites had hunted and killed Yu Yuan, saying, "We've already reported this matter to all of the ancestral kings." I'm sure that they'll act swiftly to capture the culprits and punish them severely. They'll let the world know that monarch stars can't be touched." Sun Ping was rendered speechless, his expression dazed and dispirited. He had endured for 1,000,000 years, yet in the end it was all for naught. It was as if he had lost all motivation. He didn't know when he left. However, before long, news of Yu Yuan's death had already spread far and wide. Many teams were secretly delighted. That was one fewer competitor to worry about. At the same time, the odds for the 100 Battles Academy also dropped off a cliff, reaching a staggering low of 1 to 17. This was a ranking of around 200. After all, their team still had Wu Ye and Sun Feng. Thus, their drop wasn't severer. Chapter 2330 Prodigies. Chapter 2330 Prodigies. Ling Han was filled with motivation again. He wanted that battle beast. Thus, he needed to first break into the top 100 of the competitors. Only by doing so would he have the right to compete for the number one. The rules for the 1,000 Academy tournament were as followed. In the first round, all of the teams would enter a mystery realm. Many beacons were hidden there, and the teams could search for and collect these beacons. Alternatively, they could snatch them from other teams. There was a time limit of 1 month, and the final ranking would be calculated based on the number of beacons held by each team. The top 100 teams would enter the second round, which was the round of elimination battles. That would be a competition of pure strength. Moreover, the most impressive member from each of these 100 teams would be chosen to enter the elite leaderboard. Those on the leaderboard would then participate in a competition to rank their individual strength. "I'll enter the top 100 and have a battle with Huai Jian," Ling Han thought to himself. He didn't have any aspirations of coming first as a team. In any case, coming first as a team would only win them glory and not much else. However, what use was glory in the foreign realm? Perhaps he would defect to the foreign realm and fight for them instead. Thus, he simply wanted to enter the elite leaderboard. He cultivated in seclusion most of the time. Sometimes he would cultivate under the reincarnation tree, and sometimes he would cultivate in the time cultivation chamber. The effects of these places would stack with his greatest eternity immortal physique, allowing the acceleration of time to become even greater. However, the greatest eternity immortal physique could only be activated for a limited time. This was unlike the time cultivation chamber, which he could use forever as long as he could pay. Not only he, but the Empress and Hunyo also cultivated in earnest. They naturally didn't care about fighting for the foreign realm. They were simply cultivating to improve themselves. In fact, even Sun Feng and Wu Ye were cultivating in earnest. They wished to advance further in the 8th lotus. To monarch tiers, advancing to the 9th lotus was actually quite a simple task. However, advancing to the 9th leaf or 10th leaf was as difficult as ascending the heavens. This wasn't something that could be achieved in a hurry. A dozen or so years crept by. All of the academies had already arrived, and the commencement of the 1,000 Academy tournament was imminent. News of Yu Yuan's death had already spread to everyone, and this angered many people. Someone actually dared to kill a monarch star, which was an act equivalent to challenging the entire realm. However, even after an ancestral king personally joined the hunt, they still failed to capture those 5 audacious culprits. It was as if they had vanished from the face of the realm. In fact, this even drew an announcement from a heavenly venerate. They issued a decree ordering the arrest of the 5 people. However, this naturally couldn't compare to Ling Han's feat at that time. Almost all of the heavenly venerates had come together to order his arrest, dead or alive. Moreover, they had promised the successful cultivator a smooth journey to becoming an 18th Lotus ancestral king. Because the 100 Battles Academy hadn't brought an extra member, they could only sign up for this competition with 9 people. Fortunately, the 1,000 Academy tournament only had a rule for the maximum number of participants, not the specific number. As such, They wouldn't be prevented from joining the tournament, even though they only had 9 members. However, this put them at a clear disadvantage. After all, who would take fewer than 10 members? Moreover, representing an academy was also a glorious achievement, so who wouldn't yearn to do so? When the sign-up finished, the competitors for the 999 teams were all confirmed. Apart from Huaijian, the outstanding prodigies also included Chuantian, Qinghua, Wan Mo, and so on. They had all ranked within the top 10 in the previous tournament. Everyone was curious about whether they could dethrone Huaijian from his peerless position this time, or perhaps they would duke it out for second place. Of course, there were also some new competitors who were clenching their fists and rubbing their hands. For example, Ling Han. Many prodigies were prepared to shoot to renown. Under some waterfall, a demon youth was inhaling and exhaling the essence of heaven and earth. With each breath, the waterfall would also sway in unison as if being moved by a large hand. Looking closely, one would realize that this was no ordinary waterfall. Numerous celestial bodies dazzled within it. This was called the Celestial Waterfall. It indeed contained countless celestial bodies, and its downstream was connected to the ancient realm of the foreign realm. Each drop of water that flowed out would transform into a star. It was also because of this that the force of the celestial waterfall was terrifying. Even Ninth Lotus elites wouldn't dare to stay under it for too long. Otherwise, their shields would be annihilated by the eternal punishment of the waterfall, after which their bodies would be struck by millions upon billions of celestial bodies. They would be severely wounded. If anyone witnessed this youth's actions, they would definitely feel numb with shock. This was far too terrifying. Just his breathing alone was able to influence the movement of the celestial waterfall. Just how devastating was his power. He suddenly stood up, with his eyes gazing at the distant sky. The number 1 monarch star in this realm definitely isn't you, Huaijian. Instead, it's me, Su Xing. As he said this, he beat his wings. Boom! The celestial waterfall instantly flowed backward. Amid a vast sea, an unfathomably beautiful female angel stood with her feet bare. She held a glazed sword in her right hand, one that was still dripping with blood. Behind her was a fish that was as large as a mountain, with its belly upturned. Even though it was already dead, it still radiated with a petrifying aura. "It's almost time to return," the woman murmured to herself. With a slash, she sliced the void apart. She then strode inside, and it was as if she weren't afraid of the void windstorms at all. Meanwhile, her final murmur lightly swept over the vast sea. "Huaijian, is it? It's said that he was born with the fortune of heaven and earth. I wonder if he has the ability to rival me, Jing Zhongyue." Oh, on a primitive mountain, a holy beast was lying on the ground, with blood pooled around it. An insect suddenly flew out from its head, measuring only a measly 3 inches in length. An overwhelming and violent aura instantly surged into the surroundings, causing the nearby trees to instantly shrivel and wilt. 7 breaths, the insect said in human tongue. That's 1/10 of a breath better than last time. It wore a proud expression. It had killed a holy beast at the first leaf of the 9th lotus in just 7 breaths. Could any other 8th lotus cultivator achieve such a feat? 1000 Academy Tournament. I, Shui Go, will personally defeat Huaijian. Oh, Ling Han and the others were woken early in the morning. Qi Shuang and Yuan were going to give them the final speech of encouragement. This time, Yuan isn't here. So, our goal is to maintain a rank inside the top 200. We'll fight to enter the top 100, Qi Shuang said loudly. Is everyone confident? Yes. Wu Ye, Sun Feng, and the others shouted in reply. Even though monarch stars possessed formidable battle prowess, this was still dependent on their cultivation level. For example, if Ling Han didn't use his divine sword, which of them would be afraid of him? Moreover, strength was indeed important for the first round. However, one also couldn't discount the importance of luck. If a team were fortunate enough, entering the top 100 wouldn't be too difficult. Of course, if they entered the second round thanks to luck, they wouldn't need to dream about progressing any further. Without the help of a Monarch star, they would certainly lose in the first round of knockout battles. Yuan also gave some words of encouragement. The team then set off for the competition grounds. The 1,000 teams gathered, and they were all composed of supreme prodigies. Almost everyone was a Monarch tier. Only a small number of teams had Emperor tier members, and this was only because they truly couldn't find 10 Emperor tiers in their academy. Thus, they could only make up the numbers with Emperor tiers. Otherwise, it would be a waste of their team quota. I won't ramble on about the rules. Killing people is forbidden, and drawing on any external power is also forbidden. Otherwise, a life will be paid with a life. Those who deserve to be disqualified will also be disqualified. Don't harbor any thoughts of getting lucky. These words were spoken by an ancestral king at the 10th Lotus. He was radiating with a mighty and dignified aura. Begin. He waved his hand, not bothering to speak any more nonsense. In the eyes of ancestral kings, the cultivators here were as if nothing more than toddlers. Even though almost all of them would surpass him in the future, that would be a matter heaven knew how many years later. Chapter 2331, Parting Ways. Chapter 2331, Parting Ways. One after another, the teams entered the Mystery Realm. They didn't need to worry about being attacked immediately upon entering, as the teams would all be randomly teleported away after entering the Mystery Realm. The chances of 2 teams being teleported to the exact same location were infinitesimally close to 0. At the very least, Ling Han and the others didn't suffer such misfortune. After entering the Mystery Realm, he began by surveying their surrounding environment. Newbies, stop looking around everywhere. Follow our lead, Wuya and the others said. They had already participated in the 1,000 Academy tournament once, so they were naturally familiar with this mystery realm. As such, they didn't need to observe the surroundings, and they immediately issued a command to Ling Han, the Empress, and the others. In this place, competitors were forbidden from drawing on any external power. Thus, these people naturally regained their sense of superiority. So what if Ling Han was a Monarch star? He was still trash because of his low and measly cultivation level. Ling Han chuckled and said, I detest looking at you people. Let's part ways here. You, Sun Feng, and the others were all enraged. This was a team competition, so they could only perform to their full potential if they all combined their strength. Yet Ling Han wanted to split from the team right from the get-go? If they came across enemies, wouldn't they get easily picked off one by one? Bah, don't be too arrogant. Sun Feng couldn't help but chide. You can't even rival US, let alone the countless other elites in this realm. In fact, there are no fewer than 50 people who are even more powerful than you, Yuan. Do you really think you can defeat everyone? Indeed, Ling Han said with a nod. I can't help it. Strength breeds confidence. Sun Feng and the others were about to explode in rage. They had never come across someone as shameless as Ling Han before. He was only at the 3rd leaf of the 8th lotus, yet he still dared to harbor such unfounded confidence? Where was his sense of superiority coming from? See you in a month, Ling Han said with a wave. He then left with the 3 women. Stop right there. Wu Yi roared. He immediately lashed out, grabbing at Ling Han. He truly couldn't endure this anymore. He was going to teach this audacious brat a lesson. Ling Han didn't turn around, and he simply snapped his fingers. Whoosh! A burst of sword chi slashed over, astonishing the heavens. Pooh! A bloody gash instantly appeared on Wu Ye's chest, so deep that even his bones were visible. One of his wings more so lost 1/3 of its feathers, with the latter dancing in the sky like white snow. This strike seemingly froze time as well, with everyone rendered speechless as their mouth remained agape. Wu Ye was at the 7th leaf of the 8th lotus. Even if one were a monarch star, if they weren't at the same or even higher cultivation level, how could they defeat a monarch star like Wu Ye in a single strike? Moreover, Ling Han was only at the 3rd leaf of the 8th lotus. No. He definitely wasn't at the 3rd leaf. If a 3rd leaf cultivator were so ferocious, the entire system of cultivation would fall into disarray. Don't seek death, Ling Han said in a baleful voice. He was filled with animosity toward the foreign realm. If it weren't for the fact that the angel race hadn't invaded the celestial realm, and if it weren't for the fact that there were ancestral kings watching over this competition to prevent competitors from killing each other, he might have truly failed to suppress his killing intent. After all, Wu Ye had wanted to steal his women before, and he had even acted upon this impulse. At this moment, even Sun Feng didn't dare to interfere. This was because he couldn't defeat Wu Ye in a single strike. In other words, Ling Han was even more powerful than him. Moreover, the Empress and Hunyao were also monarch stars who possessed astounding battle prowess. If they truly did battle, they wouldn't have any advantage at all. In addition, such a battle would be completely meaningless. Thus, they naturally didn't want to engage. The 5 people felt deep powerlessness as they watched Ling Han and the others leave. If we can't break into the top 100 this time, the responsibility lies squarely with them. That's right, it's got nothing to do with us. The 5 people all spoke in disdain. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others were as relaxed as could be. There were 2 ways to obtain the beacons. The first way was to find the hidden beacons, and the second way was to snatch beacons from others. The hidden beacons would all have obvious indications, such as bright and flashing lights. As long as one ventured within 2 kilometers of a hidden beacon, they would be able to discover it with ease. If one wanted to snatch beacons from others, however, this would be up to luck. Perhaps the victims would possess no beacons, either because they hadn't started collecting them yet, or because they had only just been robbed by others. In that case, they would make no gains. We have heaps of time. Let's rest first, Ling Han said. He was completely uninterested in searching for the hidden beacons. Instead, he had already decided long ago that he would snatch them from others. As such, he naturally couldn't be bothered wasting his time to look for them now. Half a month's time was likely enough for all of the hidden beacons to be discovered and collected. At that time, battles would break out, and those who were more powerful would naturally end up snatching more beacons. Ling Han and the others found a lake, where they set up a tent to rest. They would cultivate for a while every day before enjoying some delicacies and relaxing. Their days were especially leisurely apart from the fact that they still had 0 beacons. Meanwhile, in the outside world, there was a stone tablet that listed the current progress of every team. This stone tablet would refresh every 2 hours. The entire mystery realm existed within a formation, so it was extremely easy to gather information about the teams inside. Right now, the Eternal Dragon Academy wasn't ranked first. Instead, it was the Excellence Order Academy that occupied this position, having obtained a total of 97 beacons. Meanwhile, the Eternal Dragon Academy was only ranked 17th. However, no one was surprised about this. Firstly, the standings for the first round didn't bear any great significance. The teams simply needed to make it into the top 100 to advance to the second round. Secondly, the competition had only just begun, so the more powerful teams naturally hadn't made their moves yet. For example, the Firm Heaven Academy, which had placed second in the previous tournament, was only ranked 13th right now. Opposite the stone tablet, there was also a large stone that was as smooth as a mirror. On its surface was a live stream of the mystery realm. However, this stream could only capture a small number of areas. Hurry, look over there. This youth has defeated another team, someone exclaimed. The spectators here were the elites who had accompanied the teams from their academies. They were mostly at the 9th lotus, as ancestral kings clearly wouldn't mingle with such crowds. A 9th lotus elite clasped their head and exclaimed, "Who is this youth? He's far too powerful, no? He annihilated the entire team in under 10 breaths. He was clearly a junior at the 8th Lotus, yet his battle prowess could easily rival that of 9th Lotus elites. "That's Su Xing, the greatest prodigy from my academy," an elite said with pride. 3 Manifest Academy. Everyone frowned upon hearing this. They all wore expressions of doubt. In the previous 1000 Academy tournament, the 3 Manifest Academy had ranked outside the top 500. They had completely failed to make it into the second round. Now, however, after a measly 1,000,000 years, they had actually produced such a terrifying prodigy. With just his power alone, he was able to defeat an entire team in a mere 10 breaths. This was a monarch star. "The world is truly ever-changing," an elite remarked with emotion. "A monarch star was killed this time, yet another monarch star has risen to fill his place. The heavens are truly smiling down at us. Monarch stars are rising with no end, and now is the time for us to flourish." Many people nodded in agreement. Only Qi Shuang and Yuan felt extremely vexed. After all, it was extremely likely that their academy couldn't even break into the top 100 this time. How could they be in the mood to feel happy for others? And this woman from the angel race, she's also extremely powerful. They quickly discovered another rising star. This woman used her fingers like a sword, unleashing devastating bursts of sword qi that no one could rival. She advanced with no obstructions at all. "Hee, this is Jing Zhongyue from my Purple Flutter Academy," an elite said with a chuckle. He wore a smug expression, and he said this before the others even had a chance to ask. Chapter 2332 Encounter. Chapter 2332 Encounter. This time, it was as if the foreign realm were welcoming an age of rising stars and endless prodigies. The well-renowned prodigies were advancing in leaps and bounds, and new and exciting prodigies also continued to show up one after another. Things appeared to be flourishing. Qi Shuang and Yuan kept their eyes glued to the stone tablet. Right now, the 100 Battles Academy was ranked at a lowly 722nd place. To say nothing of breaking into the top 100. Even breaking into the top 200 was looking like an impossible task. They couldn't help but find this strange. With Ling Han and the other's strength, breaking into the top 100 would indeed require some good fortune. However, breaking into the top 200 should have posed no problem at all. Perhaps they had been targeted by a stronger team. However, their number of beacons had never experienced a huge drop before, so they clearly hadn't been robbed by a stronger team. Look over there. That man and 3 women are so relaxed, someone suddenly said with a chuckle. Because the streams on the stone surface weren't fixed, it would occasionally jump from place to place. Ha ha ha. Laughter instantly broke out. Qi Shuang and Yuan also looked over, and they almost fainted in anger. At the stream, Ling Han, Hunyao, and the others were casually eating roast meat. If it were only this, then so be it. More importantly, however, there were 4 tents behind them. Did they need to set up tents to eat a meal? Clearly not. By setting up tents, they made it clear that they were going to stay there for a day or night. However, what was the cultivation level of everyone? Even if they didn't eat or rest for hundreds of millions of years, they still wouldn't feel tired or exhausted. Yet how long had they entered the mystery realm for? And these 4 people had already set up tents to rest? Was this not a joke? Qi Shuang and Yuan finally understood why their academy was ranked so low. Not only were they missing a member, but Ling Han and the others were more so treating this competition with a passive attitude. It would be shocking if they could enter the top 200 with this attitude. While furious at Ling Han and the others' attitude, the 2 of them were also annoyed at Sun Feng and the others' inaction. Why didn't they stop Ling Han? They were embarrassing themselves at the 1000 Academy tournament, and this truly made them want to dig a hole to bury themselves in. Which academy are they from? Someone asked. Not sure. It seems like their first time here. Their first time? They're unclear about the situation, so they're treating it like an outdoor camping trip? I feel like I've seen them before. I think we arrived at the same time. Ah, it's the 100 Battles Academy. What, the 100 Battles Academy? Ha ha ha. I'm about to die from laughter. Just because they lost you, Yuan, they've lost all will and confidence to fight too? Humph. What use are such people? If they go to the two-realm battlefield, they'll only lose face for our realm. The elites all humphed in disdain. They were filled with contempt toward Ling Han and the others' attitude. Not only were they wasting their own opportunities, but they were also showing great disrespect to the other competitors. Qi Shuang and Yuan lowered their heads, not wanting to catch the gazes of others. They didn't want to be pierced by the intense, dagger-like glares of everyone. Ha! Su Xing is coincidentally there as well. They're about to encounter each other. Ha! It is time for them to experience a bitter lesson. This is no place for holidays. Excitement suddenly swept through the crowd. The terrifying youth was nearing the lake, and when he arrived, he would definitely see the 4 tents that had been erected next to it. Everyone looked toward the smooth stone. They were eager with anticipation. Inside the mystery realm, Ling Han and the others were enjoying their meal when the Empress and Hunyo suddenly faltered and paused in their movements. They then looked to the left in unison. There, they discovered an approaching youth from the demon race. His advance wasn't quick, yet his aura was absolutely petrifying. It was as if he were carrying celestial bodies with him, with his every step shaking heaven and earth. Ling Han and bewitching Maiden Ro didn't react. The former had discovered the demon long ago, yet he didn't give a toss about him at all. Meanwhile, the latter genuinely hadn't noticed the demon. Only when she realized that the Empress and Hunyo had been staring at that place for a while did she dazedly raise her head. "Hand over your beacons, and then P*SS off," the youth said coldly. As he spoke, his wings unfurled slightly, revealing his arrogant and haughty demeanor. Ling Han smiled and said, "If you want to eat together, you're welcome to take a seat. If you want to fight, however, please wait for us to finish eating first." This youth was naturally none other than Su Xing. He looked at Ling Han in astonishment. This person was truly courageous, daring to speak to him in such a teasing manner. He chuckled coldly and said, "You don't have the right to sit with me." He strode toward Ling Han and the others, unleashing his boundless might as he did so. He was much like an indomitable demon god. Even though Hunyo and the Empress hadn't advanced to the 11th leaf, yet they were still 10th leaf monarch stars, so they naturally wouldn't be suppressed by this aura. Only bewitching Maiden Ro showed slight signs of discomfort. After all, her cultivation was relatively inferior. Ling Han retrieved an empty wine glass and filled it up before tossing it to Su Xing. His action was steady, and not a drop of wine was wasted. "I already said, you people aren't worthy," Su Xing said with a humph. He threw a punch, yearning to shatter the glass of wine. After he threw the punch, however, his expression changed slightly. The wine glass was imbued with a strong power of regulation, and he was surprisingly unable to shatter it. With the might of his punch, this power of regulation was also just exhausted, causing the wine glass to instantly stop before him. Under the force of gravity, this wine glass then fell toward the ground. Su Xing's expression changed again. "Pa!" He reached out and grabbed the wine glass. If he had shattered the wine glass with a single punch, that would naturally have been the end of that. However, the situation now was different. Ling Han had precisely calculated the power of his punch and delivered the wine of glass before him. If Su Xing hadn't grabbed it, the wine would have spilled before him, resulting in his humiliation. Thus, he had no option but to grab it. When Ling Han had offered him the wine, he had insisted that Ling Han was not worthy. Now, however, he had grabbed it. This was clearly his loss. Yet, there was nothing he could do about this. Was it not his fault that he had underestimated Ling Han's strength? He had already lost when he threw the punch. He indeed hadn't taken Ling Han seriously. Even though his punch hadn't been powerful, it had still allowed him to realize Ling Han's strength. Interesting, he said with a smile, showing his snow-white teeth. He appeared like a vicious beast. I don't want to eliminate such an opponent here. I'll wait for you in the individual tournament. Hopefully you won't disappoint me. He gave a hearty laugh before turning around to leave. He was raging with fighting spirit. However, fighting here wouldn't satiate his thirst. After all, there were far too many restrictions. Thus he could only endure. Ling Han smiled faintly. His hands trembled slightly. Of course, this naturally wasn't due to fear. Instead, it was because of excitement. This opponent reminded him of Ji Wuming. He was astonishingly powerful. They would meet again during the ranking battles for the elite leaderboard. The two of them clearly valued each other as opponents. However, the spectators outside could only see the stream, and they were unable to hear the sounds inside the mystery realm. Thus, they were all extremely confused. Why had one of them offered a glass of wine, and why had the other accepted it and then left? Perhaps they were already acquainted. How lucky! The elites mumbled in displeasure. They stopped paying attention to Ling Han and the others. This was because the live stream's focus had changed, moving on from Ling Han and the others. It was now focusing on another area. In the blink of an eye, 15 days had already passed. The hidden beacons had almost all been found and collected, and some of the teams started to go into hiding. Others swept through the mystery realm, hoping to obtain more beacons. It's time to set off, Ling Han said with a smile. Chapter 2333, Rise in Ranking. Chapter 2333, Rise in Ranking. Ling Han and the three women joined the teams that were snatching beacons from others. They were few in number, with only 4 of them. Yet one of them was at the 11th secret, and 2 of them were at the 10th secret. Any one of them 3 was already powerful enough to act as the leader of a team. Now they were working together, and Ling Han was more so an absolute freak, whose evolution index was close to 11. He wasn't just a mere monarch star. The 4 of them casually strolled around, not attempting to conceal themselves like the other teams. It was as if they were shouting, "Come and rob me!" Many teams genuinely tried to rob them, and it wasn't long before another team charged over, encircling them. "Oh, only 4 people," someone said with a whistle. "Did you accidentally separate from the rest of your team? Come, call me Big Brother. Big Brother will protect you." 3 women and 1 man. This is a case of 1 king and 3 queens, huh? Someone said in a flippant tone. Such strong tastes. 3 angels sharing a demon, a male angel said in jealousy. The Empress and the others were all divinely beautiful and attractive, yet the only man in the team was from the demon race. This was truly despicable and infuriating. Ling Han smiled and said, "I'll give you people a choice. Hand over the beacons and let me beat you up, or I'll beat you up before taking your beacons." The 10 people exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. Was this not hilarious? There were only 4 people in this group, yet they still wanted to beat them up. An insect stepped forward and said, "Actually, we have a 3rd option. That is, we'll give you a beating." He had a massive bottom that took up half of his body. It was bright red and covered with patterns, and it was surprisingly harmonious and coherent to look at. Whoosh! He quickly dashed over. Even though he was fat, his movements were extremely quick and agile. With a flash, he immediately arrived before Ling Han, extending his 2 claws to grab at him. His claws were both filled with sharp hooks that gleamed with an ice-cold luster. 6th leaf of the 8th lotus. This insect was a monarch tier. Ling Han immediately lashed out. "Pah!" The 2 claws landed in his palms, and with a twist, emerald green blood instantly sprayed out from the insect's broken limbs. Squeak! The insect faltered for a moment before shrieking in agony. He hadn't imagined that Ling Han would be so powerful that he couldn't even withstand a single strike. His shriek transformed into a terrifying wave that surged into the surroundings. Pung, pung, pung. Mountains crumbled and trees fell. He was an experienced fighter, and he wasn't flustered because of this exchange. Instead, he raised his bottom and instantly ejected a stream of foul-smelling gray gas. This was an innate divine skill of his tribe. His foul-smelling fart contained a potent poison, one that could phase those at the same cultivation level. Those at a lower cultivation level would be directly corroded into liquid. Even those who were stronger would suffer a huge hit to their battle prowess. Thus, this was not only a life-saving technique, but also a technique that could turn the tables and lead to victory. Ling Han filled his cheeks before blowing a mouthful of air. Whoosh! Like the devastating gales of heaven, a powerful gust of wind swept forth. As it surged forward, all of the gray gas was swept away, clearing the surroundings once again. The smug smile of the insect instantly collapsed. He trembled in apprehension, realizing that he had come across a formidable opponent. This person was not just a little more powerful than him. Instead, he had a crushing advantage over him. Even though they were prohibited from killing each other in the first round, there was no rule against pummeling other people. However, who would want to get pummeled? Especially when they were mostly all monarch tiers who were destined to become ancestral kings in the future. Getting pummeled would be a stain on their name, and it would definitely result in them becoming the butt of jokes in the future. Flee! The 9 other people hurriedly sprinted off. In any case, their teammate definitely wouldn't be killed. At most, he would only suffer some physical pain. As such, protecting the beacons was their priority. The Empress Hunyeo and Bewitching Maiden Ro split up to pursue these people. Apart from Bewitching Maiden, Ro being slightly weaker, the Empress and Hunyeo were both 10th secret monarch stars. Just how great was their battle prowess? As long as they didn't encounter 11th secret monarch stars, who could defeat them? Not a single one of the 10 people managed to escape. Instead, they were all captured by Ling Han and the others. This was slightly ironic. In the beginning, it was these 10 people who had encircled Ling Han and the others and threatened to rob them. In the blink of an eye, however, their positions had swapped. Which option do you choose? Ling Han asked with a smile, "If you hand over the beacons first, I can pummel you less severely." The 10 people were rendered speechless. However, they all retrieved their beacons and handed them over to Ling Han. Ling Han counted the beacons. These people had obtained quite the number, with 70 beacons in total. He smiled and said, "Time for the beating." The 4 of them lashed out, giving the 10 people a harsh lesson. Only then did they let them leave. They then started to casually stroll around again, looking for their next target. At the same time, they were also waiting for prey to bring itself over. Luck was on their side, and it wasn't long before they came across another team. These people didn't speak as they immediately turned around to head toward them. They were proactive and cooperative. "Seeing that you're so obedient, I'll only rob half of your beacons," Ling Han said with a chuckle. After all, he had only just started hunting, and these people were also so proactive and cooperative. He would give them a 50% discount. "How impudent," the 10 people said with cold chuckles. They immediately launched an attack. After only 2 minutes, the battle drew to a close. The 10 people were all bruised and battered, and they were filled with dejection and despair as they left. They were overcome with regret. They had actually charged into the jaws of these murderous people. How incredibly foolish. Fortunately, the 4 people had been principled enough, and they had only robbed half of their beacons, just as they promised. This left them with a glimmer of hope. However, only a short while later, they came across a lone woman from the angel race. She was astonishingly beautiful, and her bare feet were as smooth and white as jade. Her silky hair billowed in the air, making her appear graceful and ethereal. She was much like a celestial maiden. "Hand over your beacons," the woman said calmly. However, her voice had a hint of force and dominance. The 10 people were incredibly ticked off. They had only just been robbed by 4 people, and now they were being challenged by a single person? Did they look like pushovers? "Capture her." The 10 people charged forward in unison, yearning to capture the woman. Even obtaining a single beacon would be good. The woman humphed before snapping her fingers. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Bursts of sword chi slashed forward. Pooh, piu, piu, piu. The 10 people were all nailed to the ground. These swords of light formed from the regulations were incredibly devastating. After robbing them poor, the woman left gracefully. The 10 people exchanged gloomy glances. Being robbed by Ling Han had still been somewhat of a fortune. After all, he had only taken half of their beacons. However, they had immediately come across a powerful woman who had taken all of their remaining beacons. They were instantly plunged into poverty. The woman left in the same direction as those 4 people. Perhaps they'll encounter each other? A person suddenly said, "Hee, that'll be entertaining." Some of them even clasped their hands in prayer, saying, "Praise the heavens, please let them encounter each other." Star, star, star. In the outside world, because of Ling Han and the other's success in robbing other teams, the points and ranking of the 100 Battles Academy also started to soar. In only half a day, they had already risen from a lowly 700 and something to 400 and something. This was a significant rise that attracted much attention. Chapter 2334, Rapid Rise. Chapter 2334, Rapid Rise. What's going on? The 100 Battles Academy is suddenly unleashing its might. They're missing you, Yuan, so how can they be so powerful? That's right, and there are even 4 of them holidaying next to a lake. With only 5 people, they actually defeated so many teams in half a day. Incredible. This attracted the attention of many elites. However, even though the scores and rankings would update in real time, the live streams on the smooth stone couldn't be controlled. They could only observe the places that were shown. They couldn't choose to follow a specific team. Qi Shuang and Yuan exchanged a glance. Perhaps Sun Feng and the others had unleashed their might. These little brats were truly able to endure. They had caused them to needlessly worry for more than a dozen days. Very well, continue to charge. Break into the top 200 in a single breath. Qi Shuang and Yuan were astonished to discover that their prayers were actually answered. The 100 Battles Academy continued to rise up the ranks, charging from the 400s into the 300s, and then from the 300s toward the 200s. However, the higher the rankings, the greater the difference between the number of beacons. This caused the 100 Battles Academy's charge to slow down. Instead of soaring up the rankings by dozens of places at a time, they could only climb up by 4 or 5 places at a time, and then 2 or 3 places, and then finally 1 or 2 places. 214th, 213th, 212th. The 2 elites continued to observe the rankings. They never knew that they had such a hobby. When the 100 Battles Academy finally broke into the top 200, they were so excited that they even embraced in joy. However, they immediately separated upon realizing this. Phut! An insect and a holy beast had actually embraced? This was an absolute joke. This was akin to a demon getting together with an angel. They would be jeered at by most people. In any case, this wasn't their final ranking. The 100 Battles Academy continued to climb the leaderboard, going from 190th to 180th, and then to 170th. Even though their rise was slow, there was still a great deal of time remaining. Judging from this trend, it was almost certain that they would break into the top 100. Qi Shuang and Yuan were absolutely delighted. Ha! However, they quickly realized that the 100 Battles Academy score had stopped rising. In fact, it had even fallen a little. Even though it wasn't significant, it had resulted in their rank falling by a few positions as well. What was going on? Inside the mystery realm, Ling Han and the others were being blocked by an attractive woman from the angel race. Her demeanor was graceful, and her beauty was breathtaking. Her snow-white wings were radiating with purity and holiness, yet it was her aura that more so astonished Ling Han and the others. Her aura was like the sea, vast and profound. "Hand over your beacons," Jing Zhongyue said calmly. Only a single person was worthy of being her opponent, that was Huai Jian, the person who sat atop the throne. The others weren't even worthy of a single glance. Fighting spirit burned in Ling Han's eyes. The foreign realm was truly brimming with prodigies. He had initially thought that only Huai Jian was worthy of being his opponent. Yet he had first come across Su Xing, and he had now come across this woman from the angel race. They all caused him to burn with fighting spirit. They were definitely worthy opponents. No wonder the celestial realm could only suffer suppression. The environment of heaven and earth was different, so the gulf between the prodigies of the two realms was also astounding. He took a step forward. Boom! His aura rose explosively. Jing Zhongyue faltered upon seeing this. Her opponent's aura could actually rival hers. Such a person existed in the world. "Huai Jian!" she exclaimed in a solemn voice. However, she immediately shook her head. Even though Huai Jian was also a man, he was from the angel race. Meanwhile, the man before her was a legitimate demon. The difference between them was far too great. "Who are you?" she asked. "Bah." Ling Han replied calmly. "From the 100 Battles Academy." Jing Zhongyue was astonished. 100 Battles Academy? She was indeed aware of this academy. However, she couldn't recall any powerful prodigy from this academy. "Oh, that's right. They have a monarch star called you something." However, his name definitely wasn't Ba. "Jing Zhongyue from the Purple Flutter Academy," she said in introduction. She didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han. Instead, she already treated him as an opponent. Otherwise, she wouldn't have announced her identity weaklings weren't worthy of learning her name. "Show me your strength," she said. Ling Han clenched his fists and replied, "Sure thing." "Show." Like a beautiful and graceful crane, Jing Zhongyue rapidly swooped over. With a flap of her arms, hundreds of bursts of sword qi instantly materialized in the air, blotting out heaven and earth as they shot toward Ling Han. Ling Han was naturally unfazed. He unleashed his fists of fury, unleashing large attacks that were as mystical as could be. The two prodigies exchanged blows, facing each other head-on. In the blink of an eye, they had already completed more than 100 exchanges. As they watched on, Hunyao and the Empress also started to brim with fighting spirit. They weren't resigned to standing on the sidelines. However, there was seemingly a gulf between the 10th secret and the 11th secret, one that was astoundingly large. If one couldn't surmount this gulf, they would have no right to participate in the ultimate competition of the 1000 Academy tournament. No, they definitely had to advance to the 11th secret as soon as possible. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have the right to battle against prodigies such as Jing Zhongyue and Su Xing. Xiao! Jing Zhongyue and Ling Han separated, with neither of them attacking again. "Doing battle here has far too many restrictions," Jing Zhongyue said. "You deserve a place on the elite leaderboard. I look forward to battling with you then." Ling Han nodded in acknowledgement. This woman was indeed powerful. However, he didn't feel like he couldn't win. This was because his physique was unfathomably powerful. At the same time, it was also because he had comprehended the regulations of the two realms. No monarch star from the foreign realm had achieved the same feat. "We'll battle then." Jing Zhongyue left with grace. Meanwhile, Hunyao and the Empress didn't have any more interest in doing battle. They both entered the Black Tower to cultivate. They yearned to advance as quickly as possible. Ling Han continued to hunt other teams with bewitching maiden row. Even though they were few in number, their battle prowess had barely been reduced at all. This was naturally because of Ling Han's presence. A prodigy at the 11th leaf was equivalent to 10 or even up to 20 prodigies at the 10th leaf. As long as he didn't come across a fellow 11th leaf prodigy, Ling Han could easily defeat everyone else. In fact, it could be said that as long as he didn't come across supreme freaks such as Su Xing and Jing Zhongyue, he could defeat all other 11th leaf monarch stars such as Yu Yuan within 100 strikes. Day after day passed, and when they reached the 25th day, the 100 Battles Academy had already broken into the top 100 on the leaderboard. Qi Shuang and Yuan were overjoyed upon seeing this, even though the ranking battles would beat them back into their original shape, leaving them ranked 99th or 100th. This would only be a small drop in ranking compared to last time. Moreover, when the next tournament came around, Ling Han, the Empress, and the others would have already matured, while Huai Jian and the other heaven-defying freaks would have already moved on. At that time, it would be the 100 Battles Academies' turn to reign supreme. Inside the Mystery Realm, Ling Han naturally didn't know the ranking of their team. However, because he needed to guarantee a top 100 ranking, he didn't stop robbing other teams of their beacons. In fact, several teams with 11th secret monarch stars fell victim to him as well, falling back into poverty. It was very likely that they would be eliminated if they didn't obtain enough beacons again. Being eliminated even though their teams included 11th secret monarch stars. What could they do about this? Who told them to suffer such great misfortune? Outside the Mystery Realm, the elites from these academies all wore grim expressions. The first round was already drawing to a close, yet their academies had suddenly suffered such a huge blow. They had instantly descended to hell. Meanwhile, the grins of Qi Shuang and Yuan were almost reaching their ears. They were definitely going to heap praise on Sun Feng and the others when the latter came out. Chapter 2335 Robbery. Chapter 2335 Robbery. Qi Shuang and Yuan naturally couldn't imagine that this sudden attack had actually been carried out by Ling Han and the others. After all, in their eyes, these four were lazy and irresponsible people. They had already given up on Ling Han and the others long ago. When the latter came out from the Mystery Realm, Qi Shuang and Yuan would definitely give them a spray. If they didn't yearn to improve, what did it matter that they were monarch stars? Perhaps they would give up after coming across the smallest of obstructions. The first round came to an end, and the Mystery Realm opened back up. Everyone had to stop their fights. Otherwise, the obtained beacons wouldn't count, and they would more so face severe punishment. The teams in hiding also made their way back out, because more powerful teams might also get robbed poor by others. It didn't matter that some hidden teams didn't possess many beacons. It was still extremely likely that they would obtain a decent ranking. For example, they might rank in the 300s or 400s. Ranking above 500 was already a victory. Sun Feng and the others were dejected as they walked out from the Mystery Realm. In order to improve their ranking, they had continued to battle in the Mystery Realm. However, they had unfortunately come across a stronger team and had all of their beacons stolen. Even though they had managed to obtain some more beacons afterward, it was nowhere near the amount that they had lost. Thus, they were naturally dispirited and deflated. "Beautiful job!" Qi Shuang and Yuan said as they walked over. They were grinning from ear to ear. What's going on? Sun Feng and the others were all extremely confused. They had done a beautiful job? What in the world was going on? Lord Qi Shuang, are you trying to console us? Wuya asked. The elites were far too mean now. They had clearly performed poorly, and they were clearly feeling dejected. Yet these elites were still joking around with them? This kind of consoling wouldn't help them at all. Instead, it would only cause them to feel even more vexed. These were backhanded remarks. These were words of mockery. Humph! When they advanced to the 9th lotus, they would definitely avenge this humiliation. Oh, you guys aren't aware that you ranked 42nd? Qi Shuang asked in surprise. Even though it was indeed impossible to see the rankings inside the Mystery Realm, couldn't they at least estimate their ranking based on the number of beacons that they had obtained? 42. 42nd. Sun Feng and the others exchanged incredulous glances. They had only obtained a total of 36 beacons, yet they had ranked 42nd. Gasp! Just how many powerful teams had been robbed clean? Otherwise, how could they have ranked 42nd with so few beacons? To say nothing of 42nd, even ranking 420th would have been difficult. However, would Qi Shuang and Yuan joke about this? Moreover, they were chuckling like fools at this moment, so they were definitely telling the truth. Sun Feng and the others finally accepted this result. They had indeed broken into the top 100. Even though coming 42nd or 100th didn't make much difference, coming 100th compared to 101st made a humongous difference. The latter would be eliminated, and the former could proceed to the second round. Ha ha ha! Sun Feng and the others all roared with laughter. They had suddenly gone from inconsolable grief to uncontrollable joy. The ebbs and flows of life were far too stimulating. Oh, that's right. Lords Ba and his 3 women were far too uncooperative. They insisted on parting ways immediately after entering the mystery realm, Wu said. He immediately started to snitch on Ling Han and the others. He had been viciously struck by Ling Han, and his wound was still hurting to this day. The expressions of Qi Shuang and Yuan instantly became grim. They couldn't help but feel angry upon thinking of Ling Han and the others. They had actually treated the 1000 Academy tournament as a holiday. If it weren't for the fact that 3 of them were Monarch Stars, they would have definitely given them severe punishment this time. In fact, they might have even expelled them from the Academy. We know, Yuan said in a solemn voice. The 4 of them erected tents to rest near a lake. That's far too detestable. Sun Feng exclaimed in rage. While we were fighting for the Academy, overcoming so many difficulties to break into the top 100, they were actually having a leisurely rest. Not only did they fail to help, but they even want to steal our glory. We have to punish them severely, the yellow bull shouted with rage. Qi Shuang waved his hand, saying, We'll discuss the punishment when they arrive. Sun Feng and the rest of you, you've created history this time. Your team only had 5 people, yet you still managed to obtain over 1,000 beacons. In fact, this result has even surpassed last time. Of course, this is even though a rank of 1st or 100th doesn't make a huge difference, as long as one makes the top 100. He rambled on, yet Wu Ya's and the others' expressions had already changed drastically. Over 1,000 beacons. Is this a joke? We only obtained 36 beacons. Gasp! The 5 of them exchanged shocked glances as they came to a sudden realization. The other beacons had been obtained by Ling Han and the others. They were just about to explain this, yet they immediately decided against it. It was impossible to bring beacons out of the mystery realm. Back when the competition had concluded, the formation had already calculated the results and retrieved all of the beacons were, in fact, constructs materialized by the power of regulations. They weren't physical items. Thus, as long as they insisted that they had obtained these beacons, Ling Han and the others would have no option but to swallow this bitter pill. Who told them to relax next to a lake? The 5 people immediately exchanged these thoughts, coming to a unanimous decision. At this moment, Ling Han and the others finally returned from the mystery realm. Qi Shuang's expression darkened, and he said, You guys still have the face to return? Huh, how strange. Ling Han was astonished. Had they not obtained enough beacons to enter the top 100? That couldn't be right. After all, several teams with 11th secret Monarch Stars had been robbed by him. What did we rank? He asked. 42nd, Sun Feng interjected. However, this was thanks to the 5 of us. You people are merely basking in our glory. Oh, so that's how it is, Ling Han and the others thought. As it turned out, these 5 people had stolen the credit for themselves. It was because of this that Qi Shuang and Yuan were convinced that they had done nothing in the mystery realm. Is that so? Ling Han asked. He couldn't help but chuckle. He looked into Wu Ya's eyes and asked, You're angry about being pummeled by me, so you're twisting the truth as an act of vengeance. Utter nonsense. Wu Ye immediately bellowed. He naturally wouldn't admit this. Enough with the garbage. Yuan roared. He was extremely dissatisfied with Ling Han and the others. When they returned, he would definitely teach them a lesson and grind away their arrogance. Ling Han simply smiled in reply. He didn't try to argue anymore. Some things could be concealed for a short while, but they couldn't be concealed forever. When the second round began, the truth would naturally come to light. A large insect crawled over from the distance and said, "Bah, I'll definitely defeat you." His speed was impressive, and his aura was more so as ferocious as could be. There were clearly 2 ninth Lotus elites present, yet he acted as if he couldn't see them at all. He was as haughty as could be. This was only natural. After all, he was an 11th Leaf Monarch Star, someone who was destined to become an 18th Lotus Ancestral King in the future. As such, did he need to pay any heed to 2 measly 9th Lotus weaklings? Ling Han casually waved his hand and replied, "Yes, yes, yes, I'll wait for you." The large insect took a deep look at Ling Han before turning around to leave. Qi Shuang, Yuan, Wu Ye, and the others. A monarch star at the 11th leaf of the 8th lotus had especially run over to say this to Ling Han. What did this signify? He had definitely suffered defeat at Ling Han's hands. Gasp! Holy! Fuck! Bah! Another young demon with a peerless aura walked over, saying, "I know that I'm no match for you. However, I still want to fight against you with no limits and restrictions. Can you satisfy my request?" An angel walked over and said, "I also want to fight again." This was another monarch star at the 11th leaf. A golden lion leaped forward and said, "Me too." It had 9 heads, and it appeared as mighty as could be. It was also a monarch star at the 11th leaf. Qi Shuang and the others were numb with shock. Ling Han had actually defeated this many monarch stars. Chapter 2336 Mission Accomplished. Chapter 2336 Mission Accomplished. After seeing these monarch stars off, Ling Han turned around to face Sun Feng and the others, a smile on his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The appearance of the monarch stars had already said everything. Their appearance had already slapped many faces. The faces of Sun Feng and the others were as red as a monkey's asterisk. This wasn't so bad for the 2 demons, as their faces were already red to begin with. As such, it was hard to tell that they were beet red with embarrassment. Their faces merely seemed darker. "All of you, return to the residence." Qi Shuang and Yuan immediately roared. They had naturally realized the truth. However, they obviously couldn't cause a commotion now. Otherwise, they would be losing face for the 100 Battles Academy. They couldn't wash their dirty linen in public. Instead, they would close the doors before dealing a beating. Everyone returned to the residence. The teams who had progressed to the second round would naturally be notified about when and where the second round would be held. After arriving back at their residence, Sun Feng and the others were naturally subject to a severe scolding. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others were also reprimanded. This was because they failed to show any team spirit, deciding to part ways immediately after entering the mystery realm. Ling Han didn't retort to this. However, he had already made up his mind. He would remain passive during the second round, and aim to come last out of the 100 academies. When this tournament concluded, he didn't intend to return to the academy either. Firstly, there was nothing in the 100 Battles Academy that interested him. Secondly, he was about to advance to the Ascending Origin tier, a cultivation level that was already above the academy's upper limit. Thus, he would be kicked out even if he wanted to remain. Thirdly, he was someone who couldn't stay put for too long. He yearned to travel around. For example, he wanted to travel to other dimensions. The more dimensions he traveled to, the more regulations he could comprehend and integrate. As a result, his battle prowess at the same cultivation level would also become stronger. In high-level dimensions, there were freaks who possessed an evolution index of 12. Thus, their battle prowess at the same cultivation level was definitely superior to his. Ling Han was a competitive person, so he naturally wanted to travel through the dimensions to raise his battle prowess to a pinnacle state. After resting for several days, the second round of the tournament finally commenced. The 100 teams were divided into 25 smaller groups, with 4 teams in each group. After a series of battles, the bottom 2 teams from each group would be eliminated, and the top 2 teams would advance. The former teams would fight for the rankings from 51st to 100th, while the latter teams would fight for the rankings from 1st to 50th. As it turned out, the results from the first round did have some small influence. The 100 Battles Academy was placed into the second echelon, and the group that they were assigned had a team from each of the first, second, third, and fourth echelons. Theoretically speaking, belonging to the second echelon was already a sign of strength. Of the 3 other teams in their group, the team that belonged to the first echelon was naturally filled with confidence. Meanwhile, neither of the 2 other teams had seen Ling Han in action before, so they thought that 100 Battles Academy had only made it to the second echelon thanks to good fortune. The 25 groups commenced their battles at the same time. The first round was the first echelon team versus the fourth echelon team, and then the second echelon team versus the third echelon team. The 2 victorious teams would then battle against each other, after which the victor would directly advance to the next round. The 2 defeated teams would also battle against each other, and the victor of this battle would fight against the loser of the battle between the 2 initial victors. The victor of this last battle would then also advance. Ling Han and the others entered the arena. Their opponent was the 3rd Echelon 9 Light Academy. Just like before, the competitors would be prohibited from drawing on any external power. However, solo challenges and ganging up on others were both allowed. The battle would conclude when one team surrendered or lost the ability to fight. If you don't want to suffer any pain, I urge you to hurry up and surrender, one of their opponents said. Indeed, that will save us some energy. You've already completed your task by breaking into the top 100. Without you, Yuan, you people can't withstand a single attack. I urge you to recognize this fact. Sun Feng and the others all reacted with indifference. They had been severely scolded, so they were naturally feeling strong anger and resentment toward Ling Han and the others. Thus, they decided not to put in any effort. Ling Han chuckled and reached over, grabbing Sun Feng and the others and launching them toward their opponents. Whoosh! Just how powerful was he? Sun Feng and the others were shrouded by his power of regulations, rendering them helpless as they shot forward, like cannonballs, treating his teammates like weapons. The spectators were all rendered speechless. They had never witnessed such a strange tactic before. However, it was without a doubt that Ling Han was truly powerful. Shrouded by the power of regulations, Sun Feng and the others were so powerful that their opponents didn't dare to face them head-on. They could only duck and dodge, occasionally launching a few counterattacks in reply, showing that they were already trying their best. Whoosh! Figures flew, and everyone could hear the furious bellows of Sun Feng and the others that were oozing with humiliation. However, this couldn't change their situation at all. Meanwhile, their opponents weren't faring much better. They were like fleeing ducks, ducking and weaving as they dashed around. The serious battle was reduced to a complete farce. Enough with the arrogance! A monarch star from the enemy team roared. He was an 11th Leaf Elite. He lunged over, causing the surrounding space to ripple as he did so. He threw a domineering punch. Ling Han replied with his fists of fury, instantly gaining a comprehensive upper hand. In just 100 exchanges, the monarch star had no option but to admit defeat. Everyone was stunned by this sight. This was a monarch star, one who had reached the peak level of the 8th Lotus. Yet Ling Han had defeated him in just 100 exchanges? Just what kind of crushing might was this? The strength of this person could most likely already rival that of the likes of Chuan Tian, Qinghua and Mo. No, you people are overestimating Chuan Tian and the others, someone immediately said with a shake of their head. Chuan Tian and the others were indeed in the top 10 on the elite leaderboard, but this was because most of the Monarch stars hadn't reached the 11th leaf in the previous tournament. There was a gap in cultivation level, and it was because of this that they were so dominant. That's right, another person said with a nod. This time their cultivation levels are all at the 11th leaf, so only now is it a fair battle. To defeat a fellow Monarch star with such ease and composure, I'm afraid that this person is on the same level as Huai Jian. Upon hearing the name Huai Jian, everyone instantly fell silent. This was a legendary prodigy who was destined to reach lofty heights. To say nothing of surpassing him, it was impossible to find someone who could even rival him. Could Ling Han compare to Huai Jian? Most people shook their heads in doubt. Huai Jian had already transcended the level of Monarch star. He was peerless, and no one could hope to possibly match him. In any case, it wasn't long before the 9 Light Academy admitted defeat, ending the one-sided battle. Ling Han was naturally scolded by Qi Shuang and Yuan. He could have clearly achieved victory in a proper and glorious manner. So why had he insisted on employing such unsightly tactics? Of course, they naturally didn't dare to scold him too harshly. Firstly, they still had to rely on Ling Han to unleash his might. Secondly, Ling Han's battle prowess was already equivalent to the 9th Lotus, rendering him on the same level as them. However, in the following battle, Ling Han didn't join the fight at all. Instead, he decided to directly surrender, ending the battle between the victors. This angered Qi Shuang and Yuan to death. However, they still had to treat Ling Han nicely in the hopes that he would try his best in the next battle. As long as they won this battle, the 100 Battles Academy was almost guaranteed to rank around 50th. However, Ling Han didn't bother to show up at all, using the excuse that he had internal injuries which required rest. Qi Shuang and Yuan naturally knew that Ling Han was purposefully making up an excuse. He was as lively as could be. Which part of him appeared injured? It was clear that he didn't want to fight for the academy. Instead, he had his eyes set on the individual tournament for the elite leaderboard. When Ling Han left the tournament grounds, Qi Shuang and Yuan both walked up with dark expressions, scolding him in fury and frustration. Ling Han merely shrugged, saying, "Wasn't it the two of you who said to guarantee a top 200 finish and fight for a top 100 finish? I've already accomplished this mission, so why are you still unsatisfied?" Chapter 2337. Who's the strongest Monarch star? Chapter 2337. Who's the strongest Monarch star? Qi Shuang and Yuan were about to explode in rage. They had only set the goal of guaranteeing the top 200 and fighting for the top 100 out of exasperation. This was because of Yuan's death. Otherwise, if they had a choice, would they not want their team to break into the top 50 or even higher? Now, with Ling Han's impressive showing, it was clear that he could have brought the 100 Battles Academy into the top 10. However, he immediately gave up after winning just a single battle. How could they not be enraged? If he had been incompetent, then he should have acted incompetently the entire time. However, he had clearly given them a glimmer of hope. Yet he had immediately bonked them on the head with a huge club. This truly left them feeling dazed and sorry. The two of them continued to ramble, yet Ling Han directly entered his room, not sparing them any attention. The 1000 Academy tournament continued. Each day, more and more academies would be eliminated. At the same time, there were also academies that continued to charge forward, soaring toward a higher rank. During this process, several prodigies also rose above all others. Su Xing, Jing Zhongyue, and Shui Ge. No one could have imagined that the challengers to Huai Jian's throne of dominance weren't the top 10 elites from the previous tournament. Instead, they were new elites who had suddenly risen during this tournament. In the end, the teams led by Huai Jian, Su Xing, Jing Zhongyue, and Shui Gu successfully charged into the top four. If all goes smoothly, the Eternal Dragon Academy should emerge victorious again, everyone said in speculation. The first battle was the Eternal Dragon Academy versus the Three Manifest Academy. Ling Han especially headed over to spectate this battle. Up until now, he still hadn't seen Huai Jian's true appearance. He had only heard others talking about his handsome and elegant nature, as well as how prodigious and blessed by the heavens he was. In other words, this was a man who was covered in countless halos of glory. The competition began, and the two teams entered the arena. Everyone's gazes were instantly drawn to two people. As for the others, such ordinary people naturally couldn't attract any attention. Huai Jian, Su Xing. Ling Han had already seen Su Xing before. Thus, he focused his attention on Huai Jian. He was a tall and slender man from the angel race. Just like all other angels, he was as handsome as could be, and he more so possessed an aura of astonishing charisma. Standing there, he was like the center of heaven and earth. People could only gaze up at him. Surpassing him was nothing more than an impossible dream. And, his expression was modest, and he even wore an amiable smile. However, there was still an air of authority about him. He was like the sun in the sky, wherein others could only serve as his foil. Before his brilliance, they would lose all of their luster. However, Su Xing was truly extraordinary as well. Standing opposite Huai Jian, he was radiating with the wild aura of a ferocious and bloodthirsty beast. No one could bring him to submission. Su Xing is truly very powerful. Indeed, he can rival Huai Jian's aura. It's almost impossible to find another person like him. Even if he's weaker, the gap between them won't be too large. Everyone spoke with emotion. They were overjoyed. The stronger the younger generation, the more prosperous the future of their realm. The two teams were already engaged in a ferocious battle, with the soldiers fighting against the soldiers and the generals fighting against the generals. No one ran over to interfere with the battle between Huai Jian and Su Xing. In any case, they didn't have the right to. Su Xing stood opposite Huai Jian, and neither of them moved to attack the other. However, their gazes were as intense as blades as they looked at each other, and the aura surrounding them was so terrifying that no one dared to near them. If they approached, they would be ruthlessly crushed to smithereens. Whoosh! Su Xing moved first, dashing forward as he threw an explosive punch. He was truly powerful beyond belief. His punch transformed into 9 black holes that were capable of engulfing all matter. Huai Jian moved his hands, forming a ring that materialized the cycle of life and death. 6 samsara realms, he roared. The ring continued to expand, and it was as if the entire heaven and earth were subject to the control of this ring. Meanwhile, Huai Jian stood in the center of the ring, proud and mighty like the ruler of the world. Boom! The 9 black holes collided with the 6 samsara realms. Violent explosions tore through the void, causing devastating bursts of energy to surge into the surroundings. Symbols were also shredded, transforming into a sea of energy. The shock wave subsided, and everyone was shocked by what they saw. This was because neither Su Xing nor Huai Jian had suffered a disadvantage during this exchange. This was simply astounding. Su Xing could genuinely rival Huai Jian, to be regarded as the #1 monarch star. Sure enough, you're quite extraordinary, Su Xing said. His eyes were gleaming, and he continued, however, your glory and achievements will be nothing more than passing clouds and mists. I, Su Xing, am the strongest monarch star. No one can equal me. Huai Jian simply replied with a faint smile. It was as if Su Xing was nothing more than a disobedient brat in his eyes. There was no need to waste his breath on him. P*SS off from the throne. Su Xing roared. He instantly launched another attack, his movements as quick as lightning. Huai Jian responded with calm and composure, with his two hands forming yin and yang as he materialized life and death. Only when one's comprehension of regulations reached a supreme level could they channel such power. Regulations would also experience life and death, so it was to follow that regulations weren't the most supreme power in the world. They were simply one form of embodiment of heaven and earth's magnificent power. Boom! 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 The two powerful monarch stars exchanged blows, with each exchange stunning the spectators. Even the monarch stars at the 11th leaf of the 8th lotus were dazed and astonished by what they witnessed. Their cultivation level was clearly the same, and they were also mighty monarch stars, so why was the gulf between them so great? Meanwhile, Ling Han was also relishing this spectacle. This was indeed a battle between the strongest monarch stars. He was greatly inspired, and he even felt a strong urge to leap onto the arena himself. He wanted to battle to his heart's content. Who's going to win? This was the thought in everyone's mind. Sui. In the beginning, the answer should have been obvious. Huaijian was supreme among all monarch stars, with his position firm and indomitable. To even near his lofty height was but an impossible dream for all other prodigies. This was to say nothing of surpassing him. However, upon witnessing Su Xing's ferocity, their minds started to waver. Perhaps Su Xing could truly bring with him a new age, an age where he stood invincible. However, this battle was forcefully brought to a halt. This was because the remaining members from the 3 Manifest Academy apart from Su Xing had all been defeated. They were unable to fight anymore. Moreover, the battle had already dragged on for 1 day and 1 night. According to the rules, when a battle exceeded 1 day, the team with the most remaining members would be awarded victory. Thus, it was without a doubt that the Eternal Dragon Academy had won. Everyone felt sympathetic toward the 3 Manifest Academy. They more so felt sympathy for Su Xing. Su Xing couldn't be blamed for this defeat instead. It was his teammates who had let him down. However, the Academy rankings were only to win glory for the academies. It was the person who topped the elite leaderboard who would win the greatest individual glory. Su Xing still had a chance. The following battle was between the Purple Flutter Academy and the Eastern Progressive Academy. At the same time, it was a battle between Jing Zhongyue and Shui Ge. In the end, the result was identical to the previous battle. After battling for 1 day and 1 night, it was impossible to determine the victor between Jing Zhongyue and Shui Ge. However, because the Purple Flutter Academy was more powerful overall, they achieved victory thanks to having more remaining members. They advanced to the finals. 3 days later, the final battle commenced. Huaijian battled against Jing Zhongyue, with both angels unleashing their glorious strength. Neither was weaker than the other. The spectating elites couldn't help but sigh with emotion. They were witnessing the arrival of a prosperous golden age for cultivation. Huaijian and Jing Zhongyue couldn't be separated, but the others naturally could. After battling for 1 day and 1 night, the Eternal Dragon Academy once again achieved victory thanks to the rules of the tournament. They were crowned victors once again. Afterward, it was time for the ranking battles for the elite leaderboard. Su Xing, Jing Zhongyue, and Shui Ge had already risen above all others. Their renown was no lesser than Huaijian's. They were all potential candidates to be crowned number 1 on the elite leaderboard. Who would reign supreme? Chapter 2338 in Death Study. Chapter 2338 in Death Study. The ranking battles for the elite leaderboard commenced. The academies would first pick the strongest representative from each of the top 100 teams. For example, the chosen representatives from the Eternal Dragon Academy and the 3 Manifest Academy would be extremely obvious. They would definitely be Huaijian and Su Xing. However, it was a more difficult decision for some academies since they didn't have any monarch stars on their teams. Moreover, the strength of everyone was also similar. In such cases, they would hold an internal competition to choose the representative. With Qi Shuang's and Yuan's temper, they naturally didn't want Ling Han to represent the 100 Battles Academy. After all, he had purposefully slacked off before. However, it occurred to them that they would still need to rely on Ling Han for the next 1,000 Academy tournament. Thus, they could only sign him up with dark and exasperated expressions. After confirming the 100 competitors, the next task was to divide them into groups. The ancestral king from the 4 Splendor Academy personally decided on the 16 seeded competitors. Moreover, it was guaranteed that these 16 competitors wouldn't meet before the fight for a spot in the quarterfinals. Because there were 100 people, it was inevitable that 28 groups would be relatively fortunate, having only 3 members. They would only need to eliminate a single person. Because of Ling Han's stunning performance in that one battle, he was also awarded a seeding. However, this was mocked by many people. As he was someone who showed no care for his academy's glory, it was without a doubt that his achievements would be limited. The gambling houses continued to list odds for the tournament. Huai Jian's odds surprisingly grew, by quite a significant amount too. It was now a 1-to-2 ratio for him to win. This was naturally due to the rise of Jing Zhongyue, Shuai and the other monarch stars. The gambling houses were of the belief that Huai Jian's dominant position might be threatened. The odds for Jing Zhongyue, Shuai and the others were also fairly short, coming in at 1-to-2. 1 or 2, 2 and so on. They were clearly favored by many. In comparison, Ling Han's odds were much longer, sitting at 1-to-4. Ling Han resolutely placed a bet for himself. He was confident in himself, and he was certain that he could win even with opponents such as Huai Jian and Jing Zhongyue. Another 7 days passed. The first round of competition for the elite leaderboard finally began. Ling Han wasn't very fortunate, and he wasn't placed in a group with only 3 people. In the first round, he more so faced a monarch star at the 11th leaf. This was a member of the insect race. His body was blood red, and he had the form of a ladybug. His outstretched wings were covered with sanguine patterns, and just looking at them could cause one to fall into a dazed and uncontrolled trance. You surrendered in the team battles, so why don't you also surrender now? The insect said in an enticing voice. Even monarch tears would be led astray by his words. His tribe specialized in confusing and poisoning people's minds. Ling Han grinned and said, "Because I want to pummel you." He charged forward, unleashing his fists of fury. The insect was astounded. Not only had he failed to entice Ling Han, but he had even failed to affect him at all. This was inconceivable. He hurriedly parried Ling Han's attacks. However, at the same cultivation, the gulf between an evolution index of 11 and an evolution index of 10 was far too great. It was much like the crushing gulf between monarch tears and emperor tears. Ling Han immediately gained the upper hand, needing only 80 or so exchanges to destroy a leg and wing of the insect. This was also because the insect was far too reliant on his mind games. As a result, his battle prowess was inferior to that of most other monarch stars. Thus, because Ling Han was able to resist his temptation, he was able to defeat the insect in under 100 exchanges. Ling Han successfully advanced to the subgroup of victors. The other group battle had also concluded, with the victor being a person from the demon race. Neither of them rested, and they immediately began the battle between the victors. In the end, Ling Han easily achieved victory, progressing to the group of 64. The 3 remaining members of the group weren't without a chance, either. They could still fight for the remaining position. Meanwhile, the 2 who came last would compete for the ranks from 65th to 100th. According to the rules, Ling Han could rest for 5 days. Afterward, he would compete to enter the group of 32. Ling Han didn't waste any time waking the slumbering Wally. He started to ask him questions. Normally, Wally would remain in a state of sleep. In his words, this could reduce his energy consumption. During this time, he would only maintain his capacity to process some data. Ling Han didn't understand this. In any case, Wally was like a block of wood, and he seemed to be the same no matter what mode he was in. Ling Han was extremely interested in the knowledge of high-level dimensions. Knowledge was wealth and knowledge was power. Thus, he was happy to gain more knowledge. Moreover, he knew that if he wanted to become the strongest, he would most likely need to grasp all of the formulas and models that Wally spoke about. After all, these pertain to the foundation of heaven and earth. Regulations were only the embodiment of heaven and earth's power. These were things that could be shattered and surpassed. Thus, arduously striving to grasp more regulations was actually a stray path. Of course, unless one reached a paramount level, they would have no right to interact with the power of heaven and earth. Even trying to search for it would be impossible. However, Ling Han was different. He possessed the origin magic cube, and he had once been the ruler of heaven and earth. Thus, he had the heaven-defying ability to interact with the power of heaven and earth. Most importantly, he was blessed with fortune. He had come across Wally, a being from the dark inverse realm who was the culmination of countless epochs of knowledge and material skills. Moreover, this was a being who had gone to higher-level dimensions to learn all knowledge. If it weren't for these factors, Ling Han would have still been feeling his way around in the dark. Even if he had been 100 times more intelligent and 10,000 times more talented, it would have still been useless. Wally was also extremely generous when it came to sharing his knowledge. If he had wanted to conceal something, he wouldn't have ever told Ling Han about it anyway. As Ling Han sat under the reincarnation tree, his mind was filled with the formulas and models that Wally had talked about. His mind felt heavy and sleepy. He was confident that he wasn't an idiot. However, faced with these theories and whatnot, it was as if he had indeed become an idiot. He couldn't make head nor tail of them. He first used thousands of years to grasp these formulas. He then summarized these formulas to simulate and verified the models. This allowed the models to become increasingly vivid and lively. They were no longer pictures on paper. Finally, he utilized the origin magic cube to channel and run these models. Right now, Wally had only given Ling Han one model. If Ling Han could successfully channel this model, he would gain the ability to extract void particle energy. This was one of the most fundamental energy types of the Genesis world. Even if he could only extract a tiny wisp, it would still be unbelievably powerful. However, Ling Han's cultivation level was still far too low. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible for him to extract void particle energy. Only by traveling to the core of the foreign realm or by mining ores in the core that contained void particle energy could he extract this void particle energy. Theoretically speaking, the core of a dimension should forever remain in a state of eruption. Thus, such ores definitely exist. However, unless one's vitality index exceeds 15,000, it will be impossible to detect the presence of these ores. They'll appear no different from ordinary stone, Wally said in a calm voice. His expression almost never changed. It had only fluctuated when he had seen that unopenable scroll. Ling Han pondered for a moment before asking, "Am I able to absorb the void particle energy from that scroll?" "Theoretically, yes," Wally replied with a nod. However, he immediately shook his head and said, "However, the scroll is mine now, so I won't allow you to use it. That will damage my interest." His tone was calm and serious. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh. Wally was truly a practical being. In any case, Ling Han naturally wasn't trying to take advantage of Wally. After all, he still possessed another unopenable scroll. Making up an excuse, Ling Han started to cultivate in seclusion again. He retrieved the other unopenable scroll, attempting to extract the energy from within it. Chapter 2339, Heavenly Venerate Tribulation. Chapter 2339, Heavenly Venerate Tribulation. Ling Han had clearly grasped the theoretical knowledge already, and he also possessed the right tools as well as a medium such as the Origin magic cube. However, Ling Han was still unable to extract any energy from the unopenable scroll. Naz, my cultivation level is too low, Ling Han said in his mind. Even though the power of regulations was reliant on heaven and earth, rendering their level of existence limited, they could also be regarded as the embodiment of heaven and earth. If one fully comprehended the regulations, they could naturally glimpse the foundation of heaven and earth with more ease. Thus, heavenly venerates all ascended as ninth heaven celestial kings. No one could ascend from the severing mundane tier to the heavenly venerable tier. Ling Han also understood that he couldn't chew off more than he could bite. Right now, he simply wanted to grasp a sliver of heaven and earth's fundamental power. He was confident that this was possible. Otherwise, the dark inverse realm wouldn't have deployed Wally into the foreign realm, using him to mess with the core of this enemy realm. However, Wally had been attacked before he could even carry out this mission, so he had remained in a state of hibernation for a very long time. Ling Han would cultivate under the reincarnation tree at times, and he would also run over to attempt to absorb energy from the unopenable scroll at times. He was as busy as could be. On the 6th day, he decided to give things a rest. He needed to participate in a round of 32. However, by some fluke, and just as he was about to finish up, a formidable and paramount power suddenly entered his body. This was a profoundly ancient and primordial power. It was brimming with a primal and pure aura. Rumble. Thunder suddenly roared across heaven and earth. Dark clouds rolled over, dense and thick in layers. A paramount tribulation was forming. Not good. Someone's about to face a tribulation. Heavens, this is an ancestral king tribulation. It's not an ordinary ancestral king tribulation, either. It's a supreme 18th Lotus tribulation. No, I feel like even 18th Lotus tribulations aren't this terrifying. I think it's a heavenly venerate tribulation. Everyone exclaimed in shock. There was a sea of thunderclouds overhead, with terrifying arcs of lightning transforming into giants that could break through the clouds at any time and deal a fatal strike. Ling Han was also stupefied. This was indeed a heavenly venerate tribulation. When a heavenly venerate appeared, heaven and earth would turn to target them. For example, when the Jiwu heavenly venerate and sealed emotion heavenly venerable appeared, they would definitely be accompanied by a deluge of terrifying thunder and lightning. Even ninth heaven celestial kings would be easily killed by such tribulation. This tribulation was targeting him. Ling Han came to a sudden realization. A cold chill gripped at his heart, and his premonition of danger was so intense that his entire brain hurt. But why was this? He hadn't ascended to the heavenly venerable tier. Hang on. He suddenly regained his senses. Hadn't a mysterious and profound power just entered his body? This is void particle energy. This was a magnificent type of energy that only heavenly venerates could wield. Now, however, he had succeeded in extracting some. Thus, heaven and earth treated him as a newly ascended heavenly venerate. It was also because of this that it unleashed a tribulation to erase his existence. Indeed, the heaven and earth of the foreign realm were at a higher level. Heavenly venerates wouldn't be targeted when they appeared. However, this didn't mean that heaven and earth wouldn't unleash a tribulation when someone advanced to the heavenly venerable tier. If Ling Han had genuinely become a heavenly venerate, he could have naturally dealt with this situation. However, he had only extracted a sliver of void particle energy, so how could he possibly rival tens of thousands of lightning giants at the ninth heaven celestial king tier? He hurriedly eased his mind, dispersing the void particle energy that had entered his body. Rumble. Thunder continued to roar, and lightning continued to crackle. However, heavenly tribulation didn't descend. Everyone was shaking in fear. This was a heavenly venerate tribulation, to say nothing of targeting them. Even if they were just scraped by this tribulation, Even 15th Lotus and 16th Lotus ancestral kings would suffer immensely. 18th Lotus ancestral kings wouldn't be able to block it, either. Only heavenly venerates could face such a tribulation. Thus, if this tribulation descended, no one here would make it out alive. One had to realize that the 1000 Academy tournament was still being held. It could be said that all of the prodigies at or above the 8th Lotus were in attendance. If they were all killed, the foundation of the foreign realm would genuinely be wounded for at least several epochs. Fortunately, the thunderclouds didn't become more violent. Instead, they slowly dispersed, ultimately vanishing altogether. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They felt like they had escaped from the jaws of death. Meanwhile, the ancestral king of the Four Splendor Academy immediately started to investigate the situation. Why had a heavenly venerate tribulation suddenly appeared? Perhaps some heaven-defying treasure was about to appear. This was the most popular explanation. After all, no one believed that a pseudo-heavenly venerate existed among them. They all started to scour the Four Splendor Academy. Wherever one looked, one could see people walking around with their hands clasped behind their back, acting as if they were enjoying the flowers. However, when no one was paying attention, they would start to furiously search the surroundings. It was amid this kind of atmosphere that the round of 32 was completed. However, it was as if this tournament had lost all of its appeal, with the number of spectators dropping by a whopping 5-fold. Ling Han could only poke his tongue out in secret. If they learned that he was the cause of this, just how severely would he be pummeled? Of course, even more people would covet his ability to trigger a heavenly venerate tribulation. Hang on. How did I manage to extract the void particle energy? Ling Han massaged his head in thought. He had made so many failed attempts before. So how had he suddenly fluked into success? He was completely unable to recall the process. Fuck, how the hell did I succeed? He mulled over this for a long time, yet he couldn't recall anything at all. His eyes were bloodshot, and it was as if he were a mortal who hadn't slept for several days. In any case, this void particle energy is seriously terrifying. Apart from triggering a heavenly tribulation, channeling the void particle energy for just a brief moment had also reconstructed every single cell in his body, elevating their level. My physique is definitely more powerful than before. Moreover, my power has also risen significantly. However, this kind of power is completely different from the brute power I possessed before. Ling Han's power had advanced to the ascending origin tier long ago. However, his brute power had been useless in terms of increasing his lethality. It could only increase the speed and frequency of his attacks. Although this was indeed useful in battle, it was clearly less powerful than advancing his grasp of regulations to the ascending origin tier. The gulf between them was immense. After all, regulations were the true weapons of cultivators. Without a solid foundation of regulations, one would be analogous to a powerful brute using a thin sheet of paper to slap someone. So what if they were immensely powerful? Could their slaps hurt? Now, however, things were different. After absorbing the void particle energy, it was as if his power had been fitted with deadly weapons. He could unleash deadly attacks, even without using the power of regulations. Could the power of heaven and earth not be freakish? Even though it was only a wisp. If I can continuously absorb void particle energy to elevate my physique, will I be able to elevate my physique to a paramount level? At that time, can my physique advance to the heavenly venerable tier, allowing me to ignore the heavenly venerate tribulation? Ling Han murmured. His heart thumped in excitement. Damn it! How in the world did I extract that wisp of energy? Ling Han continued to mull over this as he stepped onto the arena. He was thinking so hard that he wanted to bang his head against a wall. Meanwhile, standing opposite him, Sun Ping couldn't help but wear a dark expression. He conceded that Ling Han was indeed profoundly powerful. This was evident from his status as a seed. However, he didn't need to be so arrogant and haughty, did he? Sun Ping had clasped his hands in respect. Yet Ling Han hadn't even returned the gesture? Not only that, but he was even furrowing his brows and scratching his cheeks. What was the meaning of this? Are you belittling me? In the past, it was Yu Yuan. Now it was Ling Han. The 100 Battles Academy was taking things too far. You're taking things too far, he roared in rage. He charged forward, with his aura rising like smoke. He was going to fight for his honor. Pum, pum, pum. Ling Han instinctively counterattacked, not drawing on any power of regulations. However, he was able to easily rival Sun Ping. Chapter 2340 Powerful Physique. Chapter 2340 Powerful Physique. Upon witnessing this, everyone felt numb with shock. Was this not astounding? To rival an 11th leaf monarch star without using the power of regulations? Was this a joke? Regulations were the foundation of one's battle prowess. Even if one were an 18th Lotus ancestral king, if they didn't wield regulations, their battle prowess would only be equivalent to that of 6th Lotus cultivators. This was one of the main reasons why the foreign realm still hadn't been able to conquer the celestial realm after so long. Every single elite had to face the issue of exhausting the power of regulations. If they couldn't achieve speedy victory, they would have no option but to retreat. Otherwise, they would be seeking death. Now, however, Ling Han was relying on his physical power alone to rival Sun Ping. If this could be promoted, the foreign realm would no longer have any worries when fighting the celestial realm. Not only could they venture deep into the celestial realm, but after conquering the latter, they could even gain an advantage when invading other realms. They could transform enemy grounds into home grounds. At this moment, everyone forgot Ling Han's past arrogance and rebellious behavior. He was a profound treasure. Only the ancestral king shook his head. He had already understood the situation. It was most likely Ling Han who had triggered the heavenly venerate tribulation just then. This was because he had somehow grasped a wisp of power of heaven and earth, resulting in him being targeted by a tribulation. However, he clearly hadn't succeeded. In fact, it was impossible for him to succeed. After all, a measly 8th Lotus cultivator had no right to grasp the power of heaven and earth. In the view of this ancestral king, Ling Han had most likely ingested some kind of mystical matter of heaven and earth, accidentally absorbing some power of heaven and earth. This had then triggered the heavenly tribulation. Meanwhile, Ling Han was tempered by the power of heaven and earth, allowing him to gain a wisp of the might of heaven and earth. The power of heaven and earth was the foundation of all matter. It was naturally transcendent above regulations, so was it strange that it could rival the power of regulations. Of course, if Ling Han's physique hadn't already advanced to the ascending origin tier, the tempering of the void particle energy wouldn't have had such great effect. This was a miraculous event that couldn't be replicated. The longer Sun Ping fought, the more flustered he became. His opponent clearly wasn't using the power of regulations. However, he could easily block all of his attacks, and he wasn't falling into a disadvantage either. That being the case, just how terrifying would he be if he unleashed his true strength? This thought was not unique to him. Everyone else was thinking the same thing. For example, Huai Jian, Su Xing, Jing Zhongyue, and Shui Go all wore solemn expressions as they looked at Ling Han. This was especially the case with Jing Zhongyue. She had fought against Ling Han before, and neither of them had unleashed their most powerful attacks at that time. However, they had still been able to sense each other's power. It was because of this that they had eagerly anticipated a rematch during the ranking battles for the elite leaderboard. Now, however, she suddenly realized that Ling Han had only revealed a sliver of his power. This demon, just what was his extreme? After exchanging a further 100 or so strikes, Ling Han shook his head and finally came to his senses. He truly couldn't recall how he had achieved that. Perhaps he was better off teaching those formulas and models to Hunyo and the others. At that time, they could rack their brains together. Moreover, Once they succeeded, their battle prowess would soar in leaps and bounds. In fact, they might even forge a new and powerful path of cultivation, allowing one to avoid regulations and directly draw on the power of heaven and earth. As he mulled over this, he didn't forget to throw a punch. Pum! He struck Sun Ping square in the face. Sun Ping involuntarily stumbled back. Pa! After taking 2 steps, he couldn't help but collapse to the ground. It was as if his soul had been beaten from his body. He couldn't control his body at all. "Victory to Ba!" the judge loudly announced. Sun Ping was dispirited as he left the arena. He had lost to Yu Yuan in the previous tournament, and he had lost to Ling Han now. Perhaps the 100 Battles Academy was his nemesis? Moreover, Yu Yuan had only been slightly more powerful than him. With a bit of hard work, he could have still surpassed Yu Yuan. However, Ling Han's power was unfathomable and unreachable. Just like Huai Jian, he was lofty and paramount. San Ping could only gaze up in reverence. Ling Han fought another battle, and he naturally advanced to the top 32 with 2 victories to his name. He was allowed to rest for another 5 days. When he returned, he immediately called all of his wives and partners over, detailing his experience. They were all delighted by what they heard. Because of their aptitude, the cultivation speed of Lu Yutang, Li Sikhan, and the others was extremely slow. Even after using ancestral king blood, their cultivation speed was only slightly quicker than that of Emperor tiers. However, if there were another avenue to increase their cultivation, perhaps they could even become heavenly venerates in the future. Thus, this was naturally terrific news. Of course, only a single mysterious scroll remained. How long it could be used for was still an unknown matter. They started to comprehend the formulas and models day and night. However, Wally's formulas were complex and difficult to understand, so even the progress of monarch stars such as the Empress and Hunyo was extremely slow. It was very likely that they wouldn't make any discoveries in the short term. Anyhow, the Empress and Hunyo both had extremely clear goals. They would advance to the 11th secret before they focused their attention on investigating the void particle energy. Meanwhile, Bewitching Maiden Row was also intent on advancing to the Ascending Origin tier. She wanted to become the first Ascending Origin tier elite among them. Thus, her focus wasn't on investigating the void particle energy either. Ling Han was extremely happy about the 3 women's persistence. Cultivators needed to have their own goals. Only then could they soar to greater heights. In the following 5 days, Ling Han was still unable to make any progress. Meanwhile, the ranking battles had already entered the round of 32. Just like before, the member of the group who won twice would advance, while the member who lost twice would be eliminated. With Ling Han's strength, he naturally won his 2 battles with ease, advancing to the round of 16. Of the 16 initial seeds, only 1 had failed to advance. This was because he had come across a powerful opponent in the round of 64. He had suffered severe wounds, even though he had achieved victory. As such, 5 days hadn't been enough time for him to recover. During the round of 32, he had thus been eliminated by another powerful opponent. Starting from the round of 16, the competition format would become single elimination battles. Each person would only have a single chance. Ling Han's first opponent was Mo, the monarch star ranking 2nd in the previous tournament. He was a holy beast, a member of the wolf tribe, and was covered in long silver fur, with his tail in the shape of a powerful dragon. This tail was sturdy and ferocious, and as it whipped around, it could even shatter the surrounding space, creating a void. He had shot to fame long ago, and he had already topped the elite leaderboard before Huai Jian's arrival. Moreover, it was clear that he didn't intend to advance to the Ascending Origin tier. It was as if he wanted to remain at this cultivation level forever, becoming the person to top the elite leaderboard the most times in history. Of course, this was only the speculation of other people. In reality, he was only delaying his advance because he was unsatisfied with his foundation. He wanted to temper it even further. He stood straight before Ling Han, and it was as if he were a notched and ready arrow. "Bah! I finally have the opportunity to battle you," he said. His voice boomed like raging thunder. However, Ling Han couldn't help but find this to be a shame. This holy beast was definitely a nutritious delicacy, but how could he kill this wolf and draw him into the Black Tower under the watchful gazes of so many people? "Nyo wants to eat meat." Nyo shouted from the sidelines. She was giving Ling Han a reminder. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh. He glanced at Mo's leg and said, "How about we make a deal? Can you sell me a leg? I promise I won't eat it. I'll only use it for research." And Mo was instantly enraged. "You won't eat it? Your eyes are almost gleaming as you stare at me. Drool is almost dripping from your mouth. Whom are you trying to kid? You dare to belittle me? You're taking things too far." The wolf lashed out in rage, with an ancient symbol materializing on his forehead. An astonishing aura swept forth, as devastating as could be. According to rumors, Mo once received guidance from a heavenly venerate. That's right, the symbol on his forehead was bestowed by that heavenly venerate. Tisk, tsk, tsk. Receiving guidance from a heavenly venerate. No wonder he was able to come second on the elite leaderboard. Anyone can win this battle. The spectators were all engaged in spirited discussions. Chapter 2341 Mastered. Chapter 2341 Mastered. However, Ling Han felt completely indifferent. At the same cultivation level, Monarch Stars were already unable to pique his interest. His strength had already exceeded the level of Monarch Stars. He had advanced to a higher level. The Foreign Realm didn't have a name for this level. However, they did indeed have prodigies at this level. For example, Huaijian, Jingzhongyue, Suxing, and Shuige. Casting his gaze across to the celestial realm, Ling Han reckoned that Ji Wuming could somewhat count as a prodigy at this level. However, judging from what he had seen, Ji Wuming was actually still a little bit off. After all, the level of heaven and earth was different. In any case, if the Empress and Nyo could grasp the void particle energy, no, they didn't need to grasp it. As long as they could extract void particle energy to temper themselves, they could definitely increase their battle prowess by a significant amount. They could reach an evolution index of 11. Ling Han casually threw a punch. Even though he didn't unleash his full power, he was still able to easily suppress Mo. In just a few dozen exchanges, he had already gained a comprehensive upper hand. He then obtained an easy victory, advancing to the quarterfinals. As for Mo, the prodigy who had placed second on the previous elite leaderboard, he could only place 9th at best this time. One day passed, and the top 8 cultivators were all locked in. The supreme monarch stars such as Huaijian and the others were naturally among these 8 people. Right now, Ling Han, Huaijian, Suxing, Jingzhongyue, and Shuige were the fancies to take out the title of strongest. This was a grand level of competition that had never been seen before. Such a great number of supreme prodigies had actually risen together. However, in the next round, 2 supreme monarch stars would definitely come face to face. This also signified the elimination of a supreme monarch star. Who would it be? They completed another draw to decide the battles. In the end, it was Suxing and Shuige who suffered the misfortune of having to battle against each other. One of them would be eliminated. Like before, they were allowed to rest for another 5 days. Everyone was filled with eager anticipation. They could finally witness a battle between 2 supreme monarch stars. Even though several supreme monarch stars had clashed before, they had done so in the team battles. Moreover, they had been subject to numerous restrictions. However, the individual ranking battles for the elite leaderboard were different. Firstly, there was no time restriction. Secondly, there was no technique restriction, and they were allowed to unleash any technique without worrying about killing others. There was an ancestral king watching over them, so he would prevent anyone from being killed. Ling Han researched and investigated until he became dazed and silly again. When the 6th day arrived, he was feeling completely muddle-headed and confused. However, it was also at this moment that he suddenly felt a vast and profound energy entering his body. Void particle energy. This time, he immediately came to his senses. Crack! Heaven and earth boomed in reply, with thunderclouds rapidly gathering overhead. Ling Han didn't stop immediately. Instead, he committed his current state to memory, and only then did he rapidly stop his actions. He allowed the void particle energy to circulate around his body several times, elevating his technique. Only then did he disperse this energy. Having lost its target, heavenly tribulation also started to slowly dissipate. Ling Han had been well prepared this time, and he had made sure to cultivate in seclusion outside the academy. Otherwise, no one would dare to stay in the Four Splendor Academy anymore. After all, the situation would be far too dangerous, with heavenly venerate tribulations rolling over at any time. Who could endure this? He slowly returned to the academy. As he made his way over, he continued to replay the past few days in his mind. So that's how it is. He came to a sudden realization. Even though there were formulas and models to learn and apply when it came to extracting void particle energy, the true method was one that could only be understood and not spoken. If Ling Han hadn't become a ruler of heaven and earth before, he definitely couldn't have extracted void particle energy at this cultivation level. He couldn't have done so even with the help of that unopenable scroll. He had only failed so many times before because he hadn't been a genuine ruler of heaven and earth. At that time, he had only possessed the strength of a pseudo-heavenly venerate. In other words, he had only just been powerful enough to interact with the power of heaven and earth. Elevating one's physical power is much easier than elevating one's grasp of regulations. As long as I raise my power to the pinnacle level of the ascending origin tier, my battle prowess will be equivalent to that of someone at the consummate level of the ascending origin tier, Ling Han murmured to himself. However, it was a pity that physical power was a set form of strength. A certain amount of power would always correspond to a certain level of battle prowess. This was unlike cultivation levels, with a battle prowess of monarch stars, different from their cultivation. So that's why Wally uses the vitality index and not cultivation level to measure a living being's strength. Nuren, as Ling Han murmured to himself. He had already arrived back at the academy. He prepared to take part in the quarterfinals. The first 3 battles didn't spring any surprises. Ling Han, Huaijian, and Jing Zhongyue all successfully advanced. Meanwhile, the eagerly anticipated 4th battle was proceeding with vigor and ferocity. The 2 supreme monarch stars were both unleashing their astonishing battle prowess, producing a brilliant and enthralling battle. Neither of them held back. Their strength was almost identical, so the battle between them was naturally as intense as could be. They were unable to determine a victor no matter what. They continued to exhaust each other's stamina. Fortunately, such situations had occurred before, so the hosts were naturally able to resolve the situation. The solution was to activate a time acceleration mechanism. 1 day in the outside world would equal 3 years in time acceleration mechanism. Su Xing and Shui Go were truly as evenly matched as could be. Only after battling for a whopping 17 years did they finally determine a victor. Moreover, this was only because they were prohibited from using weapons. As a member of the insect race, Shui Ge gained a slim advantage as the hooks on his body were naturally powerful weapons. During ordinary times, these hooks wouldn't give him any advantage at all. However, in this kind of evenly matched battle, this extremely slim advantage was able to give him an edge that became increasingly magnified as time went on. Su Xing was naturally unresigned to defeat. He was skilled in many powerful techniques that could only be performed with weapons. Thus, the 2 of them had already arranged to battle again. In any case, Shui Ge was the final member to advance to the semi-final. In the next round, Ling Han would face Jing Zhongyue, and Huaijian would face Shui Ge. They were again given 5 days to rest. Ling Han didn't waste a single second. He ventured into the wilderness and started to extract the power of heaven and earth from the mysterious scroll. He continued to walk the fine line between life and death. If he messed up just a little bit, heavenly tribulation would descend without any shred of mercy. At that time, how could his frail body withstand it? Flee into the Black Tower. Indeed, Ninth Heaven's celestial kings were unable to breach the Black Tower's defenses. However, the tribulation of heaven and earth would never disappear. As long as Ling Han dared to reappear, the tribulation of heaven and earth would continue to form and descend until he chose to face it head-on. However, that would naturally be an act of seeking death. Of course, there was still another option. Ling Han could leave the foreign realm. However, there was no path to return to the celestial realm, and he hadn't grasped the regulations of the dark inverse realm either. As such, he could only remain in the foreign realm. Ling Han was playing with fire, yet this allowed his battle prowess to rise steadily. His physical power had already reached the great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier. Add to that the tempering that his physique had received from heaven and earth, and he could unleash a battle prowess at the great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier, even without drawing on the power of regulations. Moreover, this battle prowess wouldn't be affected by the dimension that he was in. Even if he went to the dark inverse realm or an even higher level dimension, he would still maintain a battle prowess at the great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier, even though he wouldn't be able to wield the power of local regulations. No wonder heavenly venerates are so terrifying. They've already transcended regulations, so their battle prowess won't be weakened no matter where they go. The 5 days passed by in a flash. The semi-finals began, and the two battles were held in unison. Ling Han faced off against Jing Zhongyue. His opponent was graceful and ethereal in her beauty. She was like a celestial maiden who could only be appreciated from afar. One wouldn't dare, toe-cold bear, to near her. "I've been waiting for this day," Jing Zhongyue said. Her voice was crisp and pleasant to the ear. Listening to her was a great enjoyment. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "Please go ahead. I won't hold back just because you're a woman." Jing Zhongyue was enraged upon hearing this. She was a supreme monarch star. So did she need others to hold back just because she was a woman? She was a peerless sword that could obliterate all matter. "Myriad forms sword technique," she said with a humph. She made a pushing motion with her slender hands, unleashing countless silver swords. These swords violently swept toward Ling Han. "Say, girl, can't we fight properly?" Ling Han said with a smile. He resolutely charged forward, swinging his fists and shattering the silver swords. He was like a demon lord as he arrived before Jing Zhongyue. Chapter 2342 Limit. Chapter 2342 Limit. In everyone's eyes, Ling Han was quite suspected of having taken liberties with Jing Zhongyue. It could not be helped. One was a dark guy from the demon race, while the other was a fair lady from the angel race. The two of them standing together would just be like a beauty and a beast. Now that Ling Han had teased her verbally in the eyes of the masses that looked to be taking liberties with her, Jing Zhongyue's delicate face turned cold, and she attacked continuously. One after another, her attacks turned into harsh sword chi. She was like a goddess of war, beautiful and dangerous, lovely yet heroic. Even the males of the demon race, insect race, and holy beasts could not turn their eyes from her. Their expressions captivated. If the result of this battle was decided by the spectators, the victor would doubtlessly be Jing Zhongyue. Ling Han put his all into the battle. His evolution index had already reached 11, and there should be no further room for improvement under present conditions. However, if he battled with an elite like Jing Zhongyue, who knew he might be able to break through his shackles and set out on a stronger path of evolution, he used various kinds of regulations easily and freely, turning them into the forms of various weapons that sliced out at Jing Zhongyue or wrapped around his fists as he attacked Jing Zhongyue directly. His tough physique was already very useful at this point. He could ignore the majority of Jing Zhongyue's attacks, and this allowed him to spare even more energy to use on his own attacks. As a result, Jing Zhongyue's attacks became fewer. Instead, it was his attacks that became even more frantic. From the bigger picture, Ling Han had already taken the upper hand. Basically, it was only him that was on the offensive. However, both he and Jing Zhongyue knew that the battle was far from reaching the point when the victor would be decided. While Jing Zhongyue's rate of attacks had decreased, the force of her attacks had increased. She would either choose not to attack, or if she did, that would be the harshest of attacks, and even Ling Han did not dare to treat her attacks lightly. However, as the battle continued, Ling Han became more and more proficient. His cultivation level had increased very quickly, but he had been in too few battles. When he was faced with Monarch Tears or even Monarch Stars, this was no big issue, but Jing Zhongyue was too strong. His attacks only had to expose the slightest weakness, and the woman would be able to take the chance to parry, calmly evade, or launch a rain of counterattacks. This forced Ling Han to continuously improve so that the weaknesses he would expose became fewer and fewer, pushing closer and closer to perfection. The stronger he was, the greater Jing Zhongyue's predicament would naturally be. Her counters further decreased, and she finally revealed an expression of shock. If this continued, she would lose. Lose. In a battle of equals, she had never considered the possibility that she would be defeated. This was a word that practically had no relation to her at all, yet it had now appeared in her mind. She was defiant. She was already a supreme monarch star. So why was it that she was still no match for Ling Han? It had to be because she had not used her weapon. She concluded that the reason lay here. She had a 9th Lotus level precious tool, and it could sustain an explosion of battle prowess that surpassed her cultivation level from her. But now that she was using her fingers as replacement for her sword, how could her physique hold up to the blazing of such great power? Her fingers would definitely explode into bits first before she even launched the attack. The circumstances of her defeat became more and more apparent, and she had no intention to make her defeat too bad. She decisively extracted herself from the battle and declared, "I have lost." Ling Han was dissatisfied. He felt that his battle prowess still had some room for improvement and couldn't help but ask, "Why don't we have another spar at my place?" When Jing Zhongyue heard this, her delicate face immediately flushed, and after a soft rebuke as she said "scum," she left swiftly. Go to his place to have a spar? No matter how it sounded, these words were ambiguous. The spectators, especially Jing Zhongyue's admirers, were all outraged, wanting nothing more than to pummel this outrageously brazen guy into mush. He was too shameless, too despicable, and too direct. Ling Han was baffled. He clearly was very solemnly inviting her for another battle, not a date. So why were they reacting so strongly? Ba's victory. As the referee's words fell, Ling Han also left the battle stage. As for who exactly would emerge victorious between Huai Jian and Shuego, Ling Han was completely unconcerned. In any case, no matter who won, they would not be able to stop him from attaining the pinnacle for the sake of the egg of the primordial battle beast. He took the time to continue tempering himself, but soon discovered that he had reached a bottleneck. His power had stopped at the pinnacle of great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier, and he could not take another step further. From the look of things, his cultivation level had still affected the upper limit of his power. He could only come back again after he broke through. The battle between Huai Jian and Shui Gu had just concluded, and ultimately the rookie prodigy had not managed to put on a show of a splendid counterattack. Huai Jian was slightly superior and obtained the victory in the battle. However, both had paid a very terrible price. That ancestral king of the Four Splendor Academy spoke up and announced that the final battle would be delayed for a month. There had never been previous cases of this happening before, but that ancestral king said that it was so that the two great monarch stars could fight at their greatest brilliance, and the reason was very honorable. But everyone knew that Huai Jian was about to be taken as a disciple by a heavenly venerate. The first prize of the elite leaderboard was specifically arranged for him, so it had to be guaranteed that he would become champion no matter what, or it would displease that heavenly venerate. Who would dare to displease a heavenly venerable tier? Ling Han was not concerned. He, too, wanted to battle Huai Jian when the latter was in his strongest state, so that he could accelerate the stabilization of his cultivation level. Only then would he be able to break through to the ascending origin tier as soon as possible. After advancing into the ascending origin tier, being tempered by the source power of heaven and earth, would he then be able to match celestial kings? It did not have to be the 8th heaven or 9th heaven. He would be satisfied with just matching first heaven. Ling Han thought that he was thinking about it very modestly, yet did not know that if his thoughts were known to others, they would definitely say that he was deluded. What kind of existence were celestial kings? They were on the same level as regulations, and even the strongest ascending origin tier monarch star could not possibly breach the gulf between ascending origin tier and celestial king tier. This was absolute, and there was no exception. Yet Ling Han did not think so. The power of heaven and earth was superior to the power of regulations. He did have a chance of possessing battle prowess that could match celestial king tier at the ascending origin tier. Let's just wait and see. He did not continue to cultivate, but rather began to concoct alchemical pills. He was just a sliver away from achieving the 9th refinement. He only had to advance into this level, and he would be able to become a 5-star alchemist, being able to first advance into the level of celestial king tier in a certain aspect. A dozen or so days later, good news was heard. Both Hunyeo and the Empress had broken through to the 11th secret and possessed the strongest battle prowess of the immortal palace tier. However, bewitching Maiden Ro had still not managed to break through. Even if she had as much ancestral king blood and celestial pills at her disposal, how could this step called ascending origin tier be so easily taken? Origin power had to be converted into source power. What about source power? The source power of heaven and earth had drawn even closer to the level of regulations, which naturally was hard to attain. Another 7 days later, Huai Jian had already recovered from all his wounds and returned to the pinnacle of his battle prowess. Hence, that ancestral king issued a command that the deciding battle was to begin. This naturally was extremely unjust and was incredibly partial to Huai Jian. Why was it that the battle was to begin once he was ready? What if Ling Han was still breaking through to some extremely crucial stage? It could not be helped. There was a heavenly venerate standing behind Huai Jian, so who could not be biased in his favor? Thus, the deciding battle began a few days ahead of time again, after being delayed for over a dozen days. Ling Han came with Hunyeo and the other women. Qi Shuang, Yuan, and the others had long since been waiting there. This battle had powerful implications. If Ling Han could win, then even if the 100 Battles Academy did not get the first place in the rankings of academies, they could still be proud and would be looked on highly by everyone. Qi Shuang and Yuan did not offer Ling Han any words of encouragement. They knew that he was fighting for himself here, and he would definitely strive to the best of his efforts. Ultimately, just who was the strongest monarch star between Ling Han and Huai Jian? Chapter 2343 Ling Han versus Huai Jian. Chapter 2343 Ling Han versus Huai Jian. The final battle was about to begin. Ling Han versus Huai Jian. The seats were filled with spectators. Not only had many great sects and powerful clans come, even supreme monarch stars like Xue Go and Jing Zhongyue were all present. They naturally hoped that the one who had defeated them could win. That way, they would know that they were just a slight sliver away from becoming the champion. This kind of mentality was actually very common. It was fine if I lost to you, but you couldn't lose to anyone else. That would make me seem too incapable. The ancestral king of the Four Splendor Academy had also come personally instead of just sending a thought which manifested into human form like before. He spoke a few words, encouraging everyone to work hard on their cultivation so that they could possibly become supreme monarch stars like Ling Han and Huai Jian. Though everyone knew that this was an impossible feat, they still applauded strongly. They had to give some face to an ancestral king, after all. Finally, the prize for the victor was also taken out, an egg about the size of a human head. It was placed on a bed of crimson satin. The whole egg was golden and covered with multiple veined patterns of purple. Upon closer look, these veined patterns were slightly moving, as if it was breathing. The egg of the primordial battle beast. Practically everyone turned their eyes to it. That was an existence that was fated to become an ancestral king. If they could obtain it, they would have a beast pet that was at the ancestral king tier by their side. Merely the level of flashiness was already off the charts. What more the awesomeness of having an ancestral king as their follower? Too bad it was going to belong to either Huai Jian or Ling Han. It must be Huai Jian's, no questions asked. That's right, an ancestral king obtained it, but was still unable to have it recognize him as its master through blood. Instead, he set it out as a prize. It has all been decided behind closed doors that it would definitely be awarded to Huai Jian, unless Ba also has a heavenly venerate backing him up. If he knows what's good for him, he will choose to surrender readily. Everyone was discussing spiritedly, filled with envy. To say nothing of them, even Jing Zhongyue, Shui Go, and the others bore heated eyes. This kind of ancestral, king-tier precious treasure was something even they were incredibly tempted by. Begin, that ancestral king said. Huai Jian clasped his hands behind his back, his expression gentle as he said, I have seen you fight before. You are indeed very strong, but there is still a certain distance between you and me. This is not because your natural talent is inferior, but rather that you have advanced into 11th leaf too late and have not reached a level of perfection in the way you use your own power. He paused. Just forfeit. When everyone heard this, they all bore impressed expressions of admiration. Huai Jian had always been cordial to others, but he was filled with inner pride. It was clear from just these words. He was filled with confidence and was sure of his own victory. There was absolutely no way that Ling Han could be a match for him, but it was not that he was completely self-centered, either. He pointed out why Ling Han was not a match for him, exhibiting fully his dominance as the top monarch star. Ling Han chuckled and replied, I have always been best at finding my own weaknesses in battle to improve myself. It is rare that I would have such a good opportunity, so please offer your guidance, Brother Huai Jian. Huai Jian was still all smiles, but his expression now carried a sliver of coldness. He had the ambition of conquering the world, and wished to create an empire that had never been seen before by turning around and attacking the Xian and I realm after he became a heavenly venerate. He wanted to build his own force, and those like Ling Han and Jing Zhongyue were all targets that he wished to recruit. Ling Han was his first target. Huai Jian was going to use his own domineering demeanor to make the former submit to his authority. And now, Ling Han's reaction displeased him greatly. That was fine. He could beat Ling Han's pride into submission. All right then, let's have a spar, Huai Jian said smilingly. The wings behind him flapped, and his whole body emanated a golden brilliance that was extremely dazzling. It was as if he had turned into a god of war in golden armor, and others could not help but want to kneel down at his feet in worship. This was regulations of light, which had the effect of entrancing the hearts and drumming up morale. If this kind of secret technique was used on one's own troops in battle, everyone would be energized and kill their enemies with no concern for themselves. Here, Huai Jian naturally could not possibly be drumming up Ling Han's fighting spirit. Instead, he was just showing how strong he was. Where the light radiated, visibility and divine sense would all be restrained, and in fact one would even become blind. Ling Han similarly channeled the regulation of darkness, but he was not a true member of the demon race, so he did not have any special natural talent in the manipulation of regulation of darkness. Thus, he merely spread out the darkness in a small zone, forcing the light out in a range of about 30 meters. In comparison, Huaijian had control of an entire 5 kilometers. It was like Ling Han was a helpless child that was in the shadow cast by a giant. Divine Sword of Light. Huaijian exclaimed lightly. Xiao, xiao, xiao. Millions of divine swords shot out all at once, shooting from various angles and blasting towards Ling Han together. It was clear that he had sensed that Ling Han's physique was extraordinarily tough, and as they were not allowed weapons in this kind of battle, he gave up the idea of a battle at close quarters. Instead, he launched a long-range attack. Ling Han shot out a punch. Pung, 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 the regulation of slaughter unfolded, surging out of the zone of darkness. A boundless killing, intent struck, instantly shattering the attack of light into smithereens. If anyone was even touched, they would definitely be driven into madness. This killing intent was too terrifying. The divine sword of light immediately shattered completely, and the zone of light also shrunk, decreasing from a diameter of 5 kilometers to 4. 5 kilometers, but it still had the absolute upper hand. Regulation of slaughter. Huaijian was surprised. Members of angel race like him or the demon race were all born with fortune because they had an affinity with the regulation of darkness or light by nature. So when they cultivated, it would be twice the result with half the effort. Thus, it was basically that the regulation that every member of the angel race or demon race was the most skilled in was definitely the regulation of either darkness or light. Yet, Ling Han's accomplishment in the regulation of darkness was actually inferior to his accomplishment in the regulation of slaughter. This guy was really too willful, wasn't he? It was not that you couldn't cultivate other regulations, but no matter what, you had to push the level of regulation of darkness to the limits of your present cultivation level first before you proceeded to study other regulations, right? Wasn't this just putting the cart before the horse? The results of unbridled greed. Jian rebuked and flicked out a finger. Instantly, light condensed, turning into a massive spear that was as long as 300 meters. The body of the spear was covered with seals of light. Go, he exclaimed lightly. The divine spear of light shot out, blasting towards Ling Han. In the zone of light, its speed was high to an extreme extent. In a flash, it had already drawn close to the zone enshrouded by the regulation of darkness, and only then did it slow down. But because this zone was really too small, the divine spear pierced through this barrier in an instant, and arrived inside the zone of darkness before further slowing down. The whole process took no more than a millionth of a microsecond, and the tip of the spear had already drawn close to Ling Han's face. In fact, it was even visible that even the skin on Ling Han's face was rippling because of the murderous aura borne by the spear's tip. It was at this moment that Ling Han moved, even faster than lightning. Pah! He immediately got hold of the spear's tip. Huaijian was unworried and exclaimed lightly, "Explode!" The whole divine spear of light immediately exploded. Boom! The seals turned into an ocean, bearing incredibly terrifying destructive power. Everyone shook their head. The gap between Ling Han and Huaijian was really too vast. In just 2 to 3 moves, the former was already out of the running. However, a strange scene appeared. An explosion actually occurred in the zone of light as well, and its scope was becoming larger and larger. Finally, the explosion in the zone of darkness had completely vanished, and Ling Han was seen standing proudly, completely unscathed. Regulations of space. Jian's brow creased into a frown. Chapter 2344, Exchange of Blows. Chapter 2344, Exchange of Blows. Just now, it seemed as if Ling Han had been dragged into the explosion caused by the divine spear, but in truth he had diverted the power of the explosion into the zone of light through regulations of space so that the spear and the shield would cancel each other out. Huai Jian was stunned. How was it that Ling Han had a grasp of so many different regulations? For prodigies like them, their cultivation level would advance rapidly, and it was as simple as drinking water for them to overcome the so-called barrier between cultivation levels. Hence, what time would they have left to cultivate other regulations? Merely cultivating one kind of regulation was already enough, and the real key was advancing their cultivation level. Without an adequately high cultivation level, so what if you were an 8th Lotus Monarch star? Faced with a 9th Lotus second leaf or third leaf, you would still lose. Only after becoming an ancestral king, when you could not possibly advance swiftly no matter how prodigious you were, would you then proceed to cultivate other regulations. Firstly, because you could comprehend new regulations through analogy and obtain inspiration for breakthroughs, and secondly, it was so you could increase your own strength. Someone like Ling Han was completely ignoring his proper duties. Ling Han cracked a grin. It is against etiquette not to respond in kind, so you should take a punch from me as well. He shot out a punch. Boom! Space was compressed, folding down on itself as he launched his attack on Huai Jian. This punch was not just merely a counterattack, but also further pushed the zone under Ling Han's control another 0.5 kilometers forwards. Huai Jian humphed, his right hand making a pulling motion. Instantly, a boundless brilliance emerged, greeting the shattered space that was approaching him. Boom! This counter from Ling Han had been blocked. Just a slight exposure of the strength of the two great prodigies was world-shaking. Everyone was curious. At the beginning, Ling Han had definitely been at an absolute disadvantage in terms of height of regulations. Yet now he was slowly countering, turning the advantage and disadvantage ratio between the two of them into 8-2. Though he was still at a disadvantage, he had already recouped who knew how much from the previously completely one-sided situation. More importantly, who knew if Ling Han had other regulations that he had yet to channel? Huai Jian's arms shook, and divine swords of light instantly extended from his fists. They were completely manifested from regulations. No one would dare to use any kind of precious tool here. He charged out, bringing with him endless light and launching a powerful assault on Ling Han. After a few instances of testing the waters, he realized that merely depending on long-range attacks could not possibly allow him to defeat Ling Han. That would give Ling Han enough time to react. Only a battle at close quarters would pose a real threat to Ling Han. Ling Han released a battle cry, using fists of fury to greet the oncoming attack. The two great prodigies clashed, one enshrouded in light like he was a god of war, while the other was enshrouded in the 3 regulations of slaughter, space, and darkness, as if he was a great demon king planning to wreak havoc on the world. The more regulations one had grasped, the stronger their battle prowess would indeed be, but it was definitely not just simple addition, but rather was far from this number. For example, if the might of the regulation of slaughter was 1, and the might of the regulations of space was also 1, then with the simultaneous channeling of 2 regulations, the might that could be unleashed would only be 1, 2, or 1, 3. This was also why everyone would concentrate on one specific type of regulations, because they would indeed be biting off more than they could chew otherwise. Huai Jian had focused on the regulation of light, cultivating this regulation to an astonishing height. His whole body was covered in interwoven light, possessing terrifying battle prowess and completely beating down on Ling Han. Even with the compound effect of 3 regulations added together, Ling Han was still not a match from him. Ling Han did not panic. Was this his limit? Of course not. He channeled another kind of regulation. Endless lightning stretched out, and his battle prowess further increased. Correspondingly, the zone of light was further compressed by about another 0.5 kilometers. Now, it was a ratio of 7-3. Everyone was exclaiming continuously in shock. Ling Han had indeed grasped other regulations. 3 types of regulations was actually not his limit. For should be about it, right? No matter how many different types of regulations you have grasped, in front of me, everything is pointless. Huai Jian declared proudly, his hands pressed down on empty air, and boom, a divine sort of light instantly appeared in the skies, crashing down heavily on Ling Han. Ling Han laughed loudly, and the 5th type of regulation was unleashed by him. This time, it was the regulations of metal, exuding an eerie air of sharpness on his fists. Pum! Ling Han's punch shot out, and the divine sort of light instantly exploded into bits. Golden light spread out, and the zone of light was shrunk further, reduced to 3 kilometers in diameter. It was close to an even match now. Everyone was already rendered speechless. Just how many regulations had Ling Han grasped? Huai Jian was also speechless. What he had said were words merely spoken in a moment of anger. Who would have expected that Ling Han really had grasped even more regulations, which made him feel troubled? With every additional regulation that Ling Han used, he would become stronger in terms of regulations. But there was actually not much boost to his battle prowess. However, Huai Jian had to guard against the scenario that Ling Han really had grasped all kinds of regulations. That quantitative change would form a qualitative change, which would be enough to match Huai Jian. Ling Han used fists of fury and began a powerful counterattack. When he used the regulations of wood, the zone of light only occupied half the territory. At least from the bigger picture, Ling Han was no longer at a disadvantage. And when more regulations were channeled, it was the zone of light that was now being suppressed. Finally, it was only left with a diameter of around 30 meters, just like how Ling Han had once been. This was really a turnaround. Everyone was speechless. Who would actually believe this scene? Though the battle had not yet been decided, merely in terms of situation, Ling Han had already gotten an absolute advantage. Of course, Huai Jian definitely could not be considered as having lost. Just like how Ling Han had been at a disadvantage in the circumstances previously, yet was still unafraid of Huai Jian, it was the same now. Huai Jian was extremely stunned. Ling Han had actually grasped the 5 elements: lightning, slaughter, darkness, and space, a total of 9 types of regulations. How could he have so much energy? This thought merely flashed past in his mind. He immediately burst out with his full power, charging out to attack Ling Han. The 2 great prodigies exchanged blows, with ultimate moves used in quick succession. They were both showing their own brilliance. Ling Han still had an ultimate move he had not used, such as the regulations of time. This could win him the battle and turn the tables around, and he was sure that it was the same for Huai Jian. This man was a prodigy that would be rare to come by even in an epic, and had even gained the favor of a great many ancestral kings who thought that he had a great chance of becoming a heavenly venerate. To say that this kind of character did not have any powerful trump cards, who would actually believe that? A sword descends from the heavens, destroying the spirit and severing the soul. As expected, Huai Jian soon used an ultimate move. A sword light streaked past, shaking the 9 heavens. This was a frighteningly powerful move. The sword struck out, and the regulation of light took solid form, appearing in the skies. It actually formed the shape of a seal, boosting the might of that sword light, and rapidly slashing out towards Ling Han. The 3 supreme monarch stars, Jing Zhongyue, Su Xing, and Su Xing, couldn't help but look stunned. If it were them that would be taking on this strike head-on, they would probably have to pay a very great price. Huai Jian was actually this strong. However, Huai Jian looked dissatisfied because this sword strike had been executed with his bare hands, and not that sword that he had been born with. Otherwise, the might could be further doubled. It was finally here. The fighting spirit in Ling Han's heart was already blazing like fire. He tapped out a finger and everything stopped. Regulations of time. Huai Jian's expression changed drastically. Whatever the realm, the regulations of time were the most important, the most basic regulations. Without the regulations of time, this realm would be completely out of order. So how could any cultivation elites possibly emerge from this realm? Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han continued with a few more punches. The sword light instantly crumbled. The pillar that had been formed by the regulation of light also shattered, and the seal in the skies fell down subsequently, having lost its support. Chapter 2345, A Narrow Victory. Chapter 2345, A Narrow Victory. Huai Jian's expression was grim. Even against a prodigy like Shuai, he was still filled with confidence and thought that he would definitely win. But now a bewilderment he had never experienced before rose up in him. He could no longer be certain. This kind of hesitation made him feel anxious. He, the top monarch star, was actually capable of feeling anxiety. But quickly afterwards, a strong fighting spirit rose up in his heart, surging out of the top of his head like flames and soaring into the skies. This kind of battle was what he aspired for. Otherwise, if the result was clear from the get-go, the battle would only be a mere formality, and even his blood would be cooling down, which also caused him to behave gentle and refined, as if there was nothing in this world that could anger him. But very, very long ago he had not been like this. He had been filled with passion and fighting spirit, longing to challenge powerful opponents. Before surpassing his opponents, he would have buried himself in cultivation, and that amazing feeling at the instant of victory could not be described. This was what a real battle was. This was the path of cultivation that he had walked, his original aspirations, and yearning to become strong. Huai Jian laughed loudly, his aura majestic. It was like he had risen again from the ashes, his battle prowess actually increasing greatly. This was a change of his mental state and caused him to be completely transformed. Actually, he had long since been able to advance into Ninth Lotus. But firstly, he wanted to represent the academy in this tournament, and secondly, he kept feeling that his condition had not reached perfection yet. Now that his mental state tensed and relaxed, he knew where the last sliver of his inadequacy lay. Once he fixed it, his battle prowess naturally reached consummate level. This kind of Huai Jian was too frightening. Every move he made could launch sword chi, and even as his eyes blinked, a pair of precious swords would leap out, slicing into the heaven and earth. Ling Han was stunned. He had not thought that such an astonishing change would occur in Huai Jian, but after his moment of surprise, he was only filled with fighting spirit. This kind of opponent was too rare. With a battle cry, Ling Han unleashed his full battle prowess, using various regulations with proficiency and showing their amazing might to the maximum extent. This was not piling regulations on top of one another. When an attack approached, he would meet it with the regulation of earth that inclined towards defense, and when he attacked, regulations of slaughter and regulations of metal would move simultaneously. In terms of movement technique, the regulations of space naturally were unique and unmatched. In the use of regulations, Ling Han was already close to perfection, and under the pressure posed by a powerful enemy like Huai Jian, Ling Han was presently speeding towards perfection. Those watching outside were all amazed and entranced, and felt an impulse to grab their heads and exclaim in shock. Whether it was Huai Jian or Ling Han, this kind of prodigy should be unique and unrivaled. Yet now 2 such prodigies had actually appeared. Would it be a relation of mutual hatred and friendship, and only one of the 2 could advance into heavenly venerable tier, or would they encourage each other, and both of them would eventually become heavenly venerates? The 2 people in the arena had already forgotten everything else, and were merely pouring all their efforts into battle. At this time, honor, prizes, and even victory had already been completely erased from their minds. There was only one word left in their minds: battle. Fight until they were completely exhausted. Fight until even their bones shattered. The 2 great prodigies were showing their full brilliance, exuding the glory that belonged to them, and others were also paling in comparison. Only Shui Ge and the other supreme monarch stars were still filled with fighting spirit, swearing that they would surpass the two of them. The others were all mediocre in comparison, and even monarch stars would feel a kind of helplessness. We fight, 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 and fight until the final bit of energy they had. Ling Han and Huaijian were evenly matched. Even when time acceleration was started, 10 days had already passed outside, but they were still fighting intensely. This was a time acceleration of 1,000 times. 10 days outside were equivalent to more than 20 years inside. At first, the two great prodigies were fighting intensely, but now their speed was becoming lower and lower, with them only launching an attack after a long period of time. This was not because they were worn out, but rather that they had used all techniques at their disposal. Now, while they were fighting, they were pondering and scrambling their brains, thinking of new moves to make. This was an even harder test of the two of them. If one's imagination, power of creation, and ability to react were slightly inferior, the battle would be decided in an instant. Now that they had battled to this point, the people outside were actually not so concerned about whether it would be Ling Han or Huaijian winning anymore. The two had already proven their strength, and they were both undoubtedly the top two prodigies of the foreign realm, being capable of dazzling an era. Perhaps the two of them would each go to a battlefield after a few tens of billions of years, leading various prodigies. One side would conquer the celestial realm, while the other would be in charge of standing against the dark inverse realm. After over 20 years of intense battling, the two great prodigies were covered with various wounds, though they had both grasped recovery skills with astonishing effects. This kind of rate of recovery was far from catching up because the battle was really too intense. At this time, Ling Han's tough physique was a very great advantage. The injuries he suffered were slightly lighter, and so his rate of recovery was slightly faster, though it was just only by a little. But as it accumulated, this became an advantage and was also becoming a winning situation. By the 13th day, after Huaijian clashed with Ling Han again, his figure finally swayed as he flopped onto the ground, unable to battle any further. His injuries were too severe. Killing intent rose up in Ling Han's heart. Huaijian was too frightening. In the future, he really could possibly become a heavenly venerate. To the celestial realm, this was definitely not good news. Ling Han had an impulse to directly kill him here and now. But firstly, he had developed an appreciation for the other party as another prodigy after battling for so long. And secondly, there was an ancestral king watching over, so there was no good chance to make a move. With this in mind, he slowly dismissed his killing intent. Bah, victory! The ancestral king spoke, his voice calm and without any sliver of fluctuation. It was practically an impossible feat to spy on the emotional changes of an ancestral king. The seal on the battlefield unlocked. Ling Han had not even walked out when he saw dense clouds spread out in the skies, with frightening lightning bolts flashing. Heavenly tribulation. He looked at Huaijian in shock. This guy had broken through after this battle. He was really outrageously bold. This person's battle prowess actually was not inferior to his own. It was only his physique that was inferior, which ultimately resulted in a narrow loss. Of course, Ling Han had not used his stamina either, and it was on the pinnacle level of great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier, which was a bit stronger than his power of regulation. Now, Huaijian was covered with wounds, yet still dared to break through. How could it be anything but outrageously bold? But if he could survive even in such a state, that would be a great boost to Huaijian's self-confidence, and could even be a rebirth of his mental state. As expected of Huaijian, Ling Han shook his head and walked out of the arena. The first thing on his agenda was to run straight for the primordial battle beast egg. Now it belonged to him. Bah, I wish to battle you again. Jing Zhong'e walked elegantly over, a precious sword in her hand. It looked like crystal, exuding a chilling aura. When she had her sword in hand, That was when she was truly the strongest she could be. I, too, wish to battle you, Shui Gu declared in a grave voice. He had taken the form of a sturdy bald man, his skin blood red all over. His skin was extremely smooth, and it was guaranteed that there was not even a single pore to be found on it. Su Xing also stood at the sidelines and did not say a word, but the fighting spirit blazing in his eyes said everything. Ling Han stowed the egg of the battle beast away, and then cast a guarded look at the three of them. You guys want to snatch my battle beast egg? Fuck! Jing Zhongyue and the others felt an urge to pummel Ling Han. How could they possibly do that? 3 days later, Sunset Mountains. Jing Zhongyue left these words behind and departed. Now that Jing Zhongyue had snatched the lead, Su Xing and Shui Gu could only rub their noses and did not set a date for a battle. It was still hard to determine who would be winning between Jing Zhongyue and Ling Han. Furthermore, even if Ling Han won, he could still be severely injured, and winning a battle against him at that time would only be unjust. The Ling Han they wanted to defeat was the Ling Han in his strongest state. Ling Han returned to the side of Hunyou and the other women, and immediately saw the incredibly excited expressions on Qi Shuang's and Yuan's face. Sun Feng and the others, though, had dark expressions. They naturally had no wish to see Ling Han shine so brightly. Niu wants to eat an egg. Hunyou set her eyes on Ling Han, already drooling,